Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. The job posting was simple. Night janitor needed for an old shopping mall that had been shut down for years. The pay was decent, and I figured it would be easy just cleaning empty hallways and locked storefronts until sunrise. The hiring manager barely asked any questions before handing me a key and telling me to clock in at 10 every night. As I stepped through the rusted employee entrance on my first shift, I was hit with the scent of dust and stagnant air. The mall had been closed for over a decade, yet it still looked frozen in time. Stores remained stocked with outdated merchandise. Mannequins stood dressed in fashions long out of style, and faded sale banners hung from the ceilings. The food court tables were still arranged neatly, though their surfaces were coated in grime. My footsteps echoed through the empty corridors, the sound swallowed by the cavernous space. The security office was in the back near an old electronics store, a small windowless room cluttered with outdated monitors. The cameras still worked, though their footage flickered with static. The lone security guard, an older man named Carl, barely acknowledged me when I arrived. "If you see anything weird, don't go chasing shadows," he muttered without looking up. I didn't ask what he meant. For the first few hours, I went about my work, sweeping dust from the tiled floors and wiping down counters in abandoned stores. The silence pressed in around me, thick and heavy, interrupted only by the occasional creak of metal as the building settled. I told myself it was just an empty space, nothing more, but my nerves stayed on edge. Every so often I had the eerie feeling I wasn't alone. Around midnight, I took a break in the security office, sipping on a vending machine soda while Carl scrolled through his phone. The monitors displayed various sections of the mall, mostly static images of dark corridors and lifeless storefronts. Then, something shifted on one of the screens. A blurry figure moved through the clothing store across from the food court, weaving between the racks. I sat up, squinting at the grainy footage. "Did you see that?" I asked, pointing to the screen. Carl didn't even glance up. "You'll see a lot of things," he said. "Best not to look too hard." His words sent a chill through me, but I shook it off. It had to be a glitch, an old recording playing on a loop. Determined to prove myself wrong, I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the store. The mannequins loomed in the display window, their blank faces turned toward me. I stepped inside, my footsteps muffled by the dust-covered carpet. Racks of clothing stood undisturbed, and the fitting rooms were dark and empty. There was no sign of movement, no indication that anyone had been here. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye, a single shirt hanging from the end of a rack, swaying gently. The air was still, no vents running, no doors open. My skin prickled as I stepped closer, reaching out cautiously. The moment my fingers brushed the fabric, a whisper echoed through the store, soft and unintelligible. I spun around, heart hammering, but the store remained empty. I hurried back to the security office, my pulse racing. Carl barely acknowledged me as I sat down, trying to shake the unease settling in my chest. I glanced at the monitors again, scanning the flickering screens. That's when I saw the people walking through the mall, their outlines pale and indistinct. They drifted between stores, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they were still shopping. A woman in a long coat strolled past the jewelry store, pausing to look into the empty display cases. A child clutched the hand of a man in a suit, their heads turning in unison as if searching for something. My breath hitched when one of them, an elderly man with hollow eyes, turned directly toward the camera. I pushed back from the desk, my stomach twisting. "Carl, what the hell is this?" He sighed, rubbing his temple as if he had explained this 100 times before. "They never left," he said. "Some places don't know how to die." His words sent a shiver down my spine, but I wasn't ready to accept it. Determined to prove it was just old footage, I left the office and walked toward the main corridor. The air felt heavier now, thick with something unseen. The distant sound of faint footsteps echoed through the halls, but every time I turned a corner, there was nothing. The mannequins in the department store seemed to have shifted slightly, their positions just different enough to make my stomach turn. I reached the food court and stopped in my tracks. A tray sat on one of the tables, a half-eaten meal resting on its surface. The food was fresh, steam still rising from a cup of coffee. My pulse pounded as I backed away, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The air around me felt charged, like something unseen was watching. A soft chime rang through the mall, the sound of an elevator arriving at a floor. But the elevators hadn't worked in years. I turned, my flashlight trembling in my grip. Down the hall, the elevator doors stood open, their interior bathed in flickering light. A single figure stood inside, its head tilted as if listening. I bolted. My feet pounded against the tile as I ran back toward the security office, my chest tight with panic. Carl barely looked up as I burst through the door. "I'm done," I gasped. "I'm not staying here." He shrugged, as if he had heard it all before. "Suit yourself," he muttered. I grabbed my bag and rushed toward the exit, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the key. The moment I stepped outside, the night air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifting from my chest. I ran to my car and sped away without looking back, the image of those figures burned into my mind. The next day I called to quit, but no one answered. When I drove by the mall a week later, the parking lot was empty, the windows boarded up. There was no sign that anyone had been working there at all. The job posting had vanished, as if it had never existed. Even now, I avoid that part of town. Sometimes, when I drive at night, I swear I see the glow of neon signs in the distance, flickering as if the mall is still alive. And sometimes I catch glimpses in my rearview mirror of figures moving just out of sight, trapped in a place that refuses to be forgotten. Story 2. The hunting lodge sat deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town, its weathered wooden frame standing against the weight of time. The man who rented it to me assured me it was sturdy and warm, a perfect retreat for solitude. I had been looking for a quiet place to unwind, somewhere disconnected from the constant hum of the modern world. The isolation felt refreshing at first, a welcome break from everything familiar. The first night passed uneventfully, aside from the wind rattling the shutters and the distant hoot of an owl. I fell asleep quickly, the silence of the woods wrapping around me like a thick blanket. But in the middle of the night, I awoke to a faint scratching sound just outside my window. It was slow and deliberate, a gentle scrape against the glass, as if something was testing the surface. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened carefully, trying to make sense of the noise. There were no trees near the window, nothing that could be swaying against the glass in the wind. I told myself it was just a small animal, a raccoon or a stray branch carried by the wind. Still, a cold unease settled in my chest, and I had to force myself to lie back down. The next morning I checked outside the window, expecting to find a fallen branch or some sign of an animal's presence. The ground was undisturbed, the earth soft but unmarked by any tracks. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and pine, the sky overcast with heavy gray clouds. Shaking off the lingering unease, I convinced myself it had been my imagination playing tricks on me. That night, the scratching returned, soft at first. then more insistent. It came in slow, deliberate strokes, like claws dragging against the glass in a rhythmic pattern. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensed as I strained to hear past the steady scrape. When I finally worked up the courage to approach the window, the sound stopped abruptly. I pressed my face against the glass, peering into the darkness beyond, but saw nothing but the faint reflection of my own uneasy expression. The forest was still, not even a breeze disturbing the underbrush. My fingers hovered over the latch, debating whether to open it and look outside. But something deep inside me whispered that I shouldn't. Sleep didn't come easily after that, and when the morning light finally crept through the curtains, I felt a deep exhaustion settle in my bones. I stepped outside, determined to find some explanation, but once again, the ground beneath my window was untouched. No footprints, no marks, nothing at all. It was as if whatever had been there left no trace of its presence. By the third night, the air inside the lodge felt heavier, thick with an unshakable tension. I kept a flashlight and a knife beside my bed, even though I had no idea what I was preparing for. The scratching began earlier this time, long before I had even drifted to sleep. I clenched my jaw and sat up, gripping the flashlight tightly in my hands. When I turned it on, the beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty space outside my window. My breath came in shallow bursts, my skin prickling with the sensation of being watched. Then, just as I was about to turn away, something moved. It was fast, a shadow shifting just beyond the edges of the light. I barely caught a glimpse before it vanished, slipping into the deeper darkness beyond my reach. My heart pounded so hard it hurt, my body frozen in place. Whatever it was, it had been waiting there, watching me, and the thought made my stomach twist. I closed the curtains, not wanting to see whatever might be lurking just beyond the glass. The next morning I debated leaving, but something about the lodge held me in place. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was the lingering curiosity gnawing at the edges of my fear. I decided to stay one more night, determined to catch a better look at whatever had been scratching at my window. I set up my phone to record, positioning it to capture any movement outside. As night fell, I sat awake in bed, waiting for the sound to return. The minutes stretched into hours, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. Then, just past midnight, the scratching began again, slow and deliberate. I forced myself to stay still, my breathing shallow as the sound grew closer. This time, it didn't stop when I moved. The scratching continued, unbothered by my presence, as if it knew I was too afraid to do anything about it. Summoning every ounce of courage, I reached for my phone and checked the recording in real time. My blood turned to ice when I saw what was on the screen. A figure crouched outside my window, its limbs too long, its fingers pressed against the glass. Its face was obscured, nothing more than a dark void where features should have been. The way it moved was unnatural, its body shifting in slow, jerky motions as it dragged its claws against the window pane. It had been there every night, waiting, watching. Panic surged through me, and I scrambled out of bed, grabbing my keys and shoving my belongings into my bag. I didn't bother turning off the lights or locking the door. I just ran to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled to start the engine. As I sped down the narrow dirt road, I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see. When I finally reached town, I booked a room at a motel, my nerves still raw from the night's events. I checked my phone again, but the recording was gone, as if it had never existed. I wanted to believe it had been a glitch, that my mind had played tricks on me. But I knew better. I never went back to that lodge, never contacted the owner, or tried to explain what had happened. Some things are better left alone, hidden in the depths of the woods where they belong. But even now, on quiet nights, I sometimes hear that sound in my dreams, the slow, deliberate scratching against the glass, waiting for me to listen. Story 3. The trail had long since disappeared beneath tangled undergrowth, but I kept moving forward, drawn deeper into the dense forest. The sun filtered weakly through the thick canopy, casting elongated shadows that shifted with the breeze. I had intended only to take a short hike, but curiosity led me further from the marked path. That was when I saw the gravestones, half hidden by moss and vines, their surfaces worn smooth by time. The graveyard was old, forgotten, with most of the headstones leaning at odd angles. Some were broken, their inscriptions barely legible, while others had been completely swallowed by nature. A strange silence settled over the area, the usual sounds of the forest suddenly absent. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I stepped cautiously between the graves, my breath coming out in slow, measured puffs. At the center of the graveyard, one grave stood out from the rest. The earth was freshly turned, dark and damp, unlike the others that were sunken and covered in weeds. A simple headstone stood at its head, unweathered, its engraving crisp and clear. My pulse quickened as my eyes landed on the inscription, my full name, followed by my birth date. I stumbled back, my stomach twisting into a tight knot. The death date was left blank, the space waiting to be filled. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation, but nothing made sense. I had never been here before, never even heard of this graveyard, yet someone had prepared a grave just for me. A gust of wind swept through the trees, rustling the leaves like a whisper. The graveyard felt suddenly smaller, as if the trees were pressing in around me. My instinct screamed at me to leave, to turn back the way I came, but my feet refused to move. Instead, I found myself stepping closer, drawn to the open pit of earth. The hole was deep, perfectly rectangular, as if dug with precision. My breath hitched when I noticed something at the bottom, a small wooden box half buried in the loose dirt. I hesitated only a moment before crouching down and reaching for it, my fingers brushing against the damp wood. It was lighter than I expected, and when I lifted it, the lid creaked open on its own. Inside was a photograph, its edges yellowed with age. My blood ran cold as I recognized the face staring back at me, my own, but younger, frozen in an expression I didn't remember ever making. Beneath the photograph was a single slip of paper, folded neatly. With trembling hands, I unfolded it and read the words scrawled in faded ink. "We've been waiting for you." The forest around me felt suddenly alive, the trees swaying though there was no wind. I spun around, my heart pounding, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The headstones no longer looked abandoned but well kept, as if the graveyard had been waiting for visitors. The shadows between the trees grew darker, deeper, stretching toward me like grasping fingers. I dropped the box, the photograph fluttering onto the disturbed earth. My body screamed at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a figure standing just beyond the nearest tree. It was tall and thin, its features obscured by the gloom, but I could feel its eyes on me. A low whisper drifted through the air, too soft to make out words, but unmistakably directed at me. The figure didn't move, but more shapes emerged from the trees, their silhouettes blending with the shadows. They were watching, waiting, their presence heavy in the air. My breath hitched as the ground beneath me shifted slightly, as if something was stirring below. Panic took hold, and I turned on my heel, sprinting back the way I had come. The branches clawed at my arms as I tore through the undergrowth, my footsteps pounding against the earth. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear something behind me, soft footfalls, whispers threading through the wind. The graveyard wanted me to stay, but I refused to let it claim me. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to give out beneath me. When I finally burst onto the familiar trail, the air felt different, lighter, clearer, as if the weight of the graveyard had lifted. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my hands fumbling with the keys as I threw myself inside. Only when the doors were locked did I finally look back. The forest loomed in the distance, its edge dark and impenetrable. There was no sign of the graveyard, no sign that it had or existed. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind struggling to process what I had seen. But one thing was certain: I had not found that place by accident. Something had been expecting me, and I had a feeling it wasn't finished with me yet. Story 4. I had been driving for hours, the open road stretching endlessly before me. The sun had dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the unfamiliar town I had stumbled into. My GPS had lost signal miles ago, leaving me to navigate the winding streets on instinct alone. The town seemed small, quiet, almost too still for comfort. As I slowed at a four-way stop, I noticed a man standing on the corner. He was tall and thin, dressed in dark clothes that hung loosely from his frame. His face was obscured by the dimming light, but I could feel his gaze locked onto me. A chill crept up my spine, but I dismissed it as exhaustion setting in. I pressed on, turning left in search of a main road that would lead me out. A few blocks later, I glanced at another intersection and felt my breath catch. The same man stood there, unmoving, his head tilted slightly as if he were studying me. My hands tightened on the wheel, a creeping unease settling in my stomach. I told myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe he had simply walked faster than I expected, cutting through alleys or side streets. But as I continued driving, every turn I made led me to another street corner where he stood waiting. No matter how far I went, he was always there. My pulse quickened, and my fingers felt clammy against the steering wheel. The town's streets twisted in a way that didn't make sense, looping back on themselves like a maze. The houses lining them were old, their windows dark, the whole place feeling abandoned despite the occasional dim porch light. I reached another stop and forced myself to look directly at him. His features were sharp, almost too defined, like a photograph come to life. His lips never moved, his posture never shifted, yet his eyes bore into mine with an intensity that sent a fresh wave of fear through me. He was waiting for something. I swallowed hard and turned down another street, pressing the gas a little harder. The buildings seemed to blur together, their monotonous facades making it impossible to tell if I had been here before. Every street sign looked rusted, their lettering barely legible. I needed to find my way out before the last traces of daylight disappeared. I spotted a gas station up ahead, its flickering neon sign barely illuminating the cracked pavement. Relief surged through me as I pulled in, parking beneath a weak glow of the overhead lights. The station looked old but functional, and I hoped someone inside could give me directions. Stepping out of my car, I stole a glance across the street. He was there, standing still, watching. The gas station door creaked as I shoved it open, the scent of stale coffee and motor oil filling my nose. A middle-aged cashier stood behind the counter, flipping through a tattered magazine. "Excuse me," I said, my voice coming out hoarse. "Can you tell me how to get back to the highway?" The man barely looked up, chewing on a toothpick as he considered my question. "Highway," he repeated, his brow furrowing as if the word itself was foreign to him. "Yes," I insisted, my frustration creeping in. "I've been driving in circles. I just need to get back to Route 16. He stared at me for a long moment before finally shaking his head. "Ain't no Route 16 around here." His tone was flat, final, like he had spoken those words 1,000 times before. My stomach twisted. That didn't make sense. I had been following it for hours before ending up here. "Look," I said, glancing behind me toward the street. The man was gone. My breath caught as my pulse slammed against my ribs. I spun back toward the cashier. "Listen, is there another way out? Any road that leads to the next town?" The man sighed, rubbing a hand over his stubbled chin. "Best bet's to keep driving," he said. "Town's got a way of turning folks around, but eventually you'll find your way out." That wasn't reassuring, but it was the only advice I had. I turned back to the door, hesitating before stepping outside. The street was empty, the silence pressing in like a heavy weight. My car sat under the buzzing lights, looking like the only real thing in a town that suddenly felt unreal. I forced myself to walk back, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. Sliding into the driver's seat, I locked the doors and started the engine. I took a deep breath, forcing the tension from my shoulders. I just needed to drive, keep moving until I found something familiar. Pulling out of the lot, I took a right, then another left, hoping to break whatever cycle had trapped me here. My headlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating empty sidewalks and shuttered buildings. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the wheel, my nerves on edge. Then I saw him again, standing at the next intersection. Closer than before, my stomach turned to ice. I slammed my foot on the gas, speeding past him without daring to look. The road stretched ahead, endless and unchanging, each turn leading me back to the same familiar streets. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized I wasn't escaping. I was circling. The town wasn't letting me go. My breaths came faster, my mind racing through every possibility. I couldn't stop. I couldn't slow down. I had to find a way out. Then the radio crackled. Static filled the car, the noise sharp and grating. Through the distortion, a voice whispered my name. My entire body locked up as I twisted the knob, but the voice only grew clearer. "You can't leave," it murmured. "Not yet." I screamed, yanking the wheel hard to the right. My tires screeched as the car swerved, skidding onto a side road I didn't recognize. The street was darker here, lined with trees that loomed like silent sentinels. My headlights flickered, the engine sputtering. Then I saw it. A road sign, rusted but visible. Route 16, 2 miles. My heart leaped as I floored the gas, the car lurching forward. The town blurred past, its streets melting into the darkness. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The moment I passed the sign, the tension in the air snapped like a rubber band. The weight lifted, the static on the radio vanished. I glanced in my rearview mirror, but the town was gone. Only empty highway stretched behind me. I kept driving, not daring to stop, not until I was miles away. Even then, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I knew, deep in my bones, that I had almost become part of that place. That if I had looked back one last time, I might never have left. Story 5. The convent stood on the outskirts of town, its stone walls weathered by time and neglect. Once home to a group of nuns, it had been converted into a small inn, though few people ever chose to stay. I had booked a room on a whim, drawn to its eerie charm and the quiet isolation it promised. The caretaker, an older woman with tired eyes, handed me my key without much conversation. My room was at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway, its wooden floor creaking under my weight. The furniture was simple: an old bed, a writing desk, and a small dresser, all coated in a thin layer of dust. A large window overlooked the courtyard, where a cracked stone fountain sat empty and dry. Though the place had an unsettling atmosphere, I reminded myself that it was just an old building, nothing more. As night fell, the silence became heavy, pressing against my ears. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and something faintly floral, like dried lavender. I listened for any sounds from the other guests, but heard nothing. No footsteps, no muffled conversations, only the distant wind rattling the window pane. The stillness should have been comforting, but instead, it left me uneasy. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind restless despite my exhaustion. The glow from the hallway seeped through the crack under my door, casting a faint line of light across the floor. Just as I was beginning to drift off, I heard a soft tapping sound like fingernails against wood. It came from the hallway, rhythmic and deliberate, stopping just outside my door. Holding my breath, I waited, my body tensed beneath the sheets. The tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by a low creak, as if someone were leaning against the door. My heart pounded as I strained to listen, but after a few moments, the sound faded, leaving only silence. I exhaled slowly, telling myself it was nothing. A settling building, a loose floorboard, but doubt gnawed at the edges of my mind. I checked my phone, the screen glowing in the darkness. 2:59 a.m. Just one more minute, and I would try to sleep again. As I placed my phone back on the nightstand, a sudden, deafening crash filled the air. Every door in the hallway had slammed shut at the same time, the force shaking the walls. The echo lingered, vibrating through my chest, as if the building itself had taken a breath. I bolted upright, my pulse hammering in my ears. The silence that followed was even more unsettling, a thick, unnatural void. I reached for my phone again, the glow revealing my trembling fingers. 3 a.m. My breath came in short gasps as I listened for any sign of movement, but the hallway remained eerily still. Forcing myself to move, I swung my legs over the bed and stood, my body tense. I hesitated before reaching for the doorknob, my instincts screaming at me to stay put. But I had to know. I had to see if anyone else had heard it. My fingers brushed the cold metal, and I turned the knob slowly, inching the door open. The hallway stretched before me, empty and dimly lit by flickering sconces along the walls. Every door, including mine, now stood closed, as if they had never moved. The air was thick, charged with something unseen, something watching. A cold draft curled around my ankles, sending a shiver up my spine. I stepped into the hallway, my bare feet pressing against the cold wooden floor. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the distant sound of the wind beyond the stone walls. I glanced at the other doors, each identical, each now firmly shut. Had there been other guests here? Had they all slept through that deafening noise? The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed from the far end of the hallway. My breath hitched as I turned toward the noise, my eyes straining to see past the dim light. A shadow moved just beyond the last sconce, its form barely distinguishable from the darkness. It was tall, draped in something heavy, its movements slow but deliberate. I took a step back, my pulse pounding against my ribs. The figure did not speak, did not hurry, it only stood there, watching. I felt the weight of its gaze, heavy and suffocating, pressing into my chest. Another step back and the old floor groaned beneath me. The sound sharpened the silence. The figure moved. Not toward me, but into the nearest room, vanishing without a sound. The door did not creak, did not slam, it simply shut, as if it had never been opened. A chill settled deep in my bones, my mind screaming at me to leave. Whatever I had seen, whatever had caused those doors to slam, I was not meant to be here. I turned and rushed back into my room, locking the door behind me with shaking hands. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pressed my back against the wood, listening. The hallway remained silent, but I could still feel the presence lingering, just beyond my door. My phone screen glowed in the dark. 3:05 a.m. The moment had passed, but the dread remained. I did not sleep for the rest of the night, my body tense and alert to every creak and whisper of wind. The silence felt unnatural, like something was waiting for me to let my guard down. As the first light of dawn crept through my window, I finally gathered the courage to leave. I dressed quickly, grabbing my things with clumsy hands, my only thought to get as far from this place as possible. The caretaker was waiting in the small lobby, her expression unreadable as she handed me my receipt. I hesitated before asking, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Has anything strange ever happened here at night?" She met my gaze for a moment before sighing. "The doors," she asked quietly. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I nodded, my grip tightening on my bag. She exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting toward the hallway behind me. "It always happens at 3 a.m., she murmured. "They never want to be forgotten." I left without another word, stepping into the early morning light, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever still lingered inside. Story 6. The hospital had been abandoned for decades, left to decay under layers of dust and neglect. Its windows were shattered, the glass crunching beneath my boots as I stepped through the gaping entrance. The air smelled of mildew and rot, a thick, stale scent that clung to every surface. Graffiti covered the walls, bright and jarring against the dull gray of peeling paint. I moved cautiously, my flashlight cutting through the dimness, revealing rusted gurneys and overturned wheelchairs. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling. I had explored plenty of abandoned places before, but this one felt different, heavier, like something lingered in the air. My camera hung around my neck, and I raised it to snap a picture of the empty lobby, the light from my flash momentarily illuminating the long-forgotten space. Moving deeper inside, I passed by the nurse's station, where old files were scattered across the floor. Some were yellowed and curling, the ink faded beyond recognition. Others looked as though they had been disturbed recently, edges crisp, pages slightly bent. I hesitated, glancing around, but there was no one else here, just the distant sound of dripping water from a broken pipe somewhere in the building. The hallway stretched in multiple directions, their flickering exit signs casting eerie red glows against the walls. I chose the left wing, where patient rooms lined both sides, their doors hanging open like gaping mouths. My footsteps echoed as I walked past empty beds, rusted IV stands, and torn privacy curtains. Each room told a story, its remnants frozen in time, untouched except by the slow creep of decay. I stopped at one of the rooms, drawn by the eerie stillness inside. The bed in the center was different from the others. It wasn't overturned, rusted, or broken. The sheets were stained and yellowed with age, but what caught my attention was the unmistakable impression in the mattress. It was fresh, as if someone had been lying there just moments before. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped closer, my fingers tightening around my flashlight. The indentation was deep, shaped exactly like the weight of a human body. My pulse quickened, and I swept my light across the room, searching for any sign of movement. The air felt thick, pressing against me, and for the first time since entering the hospital, I felt like I wasn't alone. A faint chill brushed against my skin, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. I turned, my flashlight beam unsteady as it landed on the mirror above the rusted sink. The glass was cracked, splintering my reflection into jagged pieces. But in the fractured surface, I saw someone standing behind me. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs, but the room was empty. The bed remained undisturbed except for the still present impression. My breath came in shallow gasps as I tried to steady my nerves, convincing myself it was just a trick of the broken mirror, an illusion caused by my own reflection. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I forced myself to lift my camera and take a picture of the bed, the flash momentarily brightening the room. As soon as the image appeared on the screen, my stomach twisted. There, on the mattress, where the indentation lay, was the faint outline of a person. The shape was hazy, blurred around the edges, but undeniably human. A sharp noise echoed from the hallway, like the distant clatter of metal against tile. My head snapped toward the open door, my breath catching as I strained to listen. The sound had come from deeper inside the hospital, from somewhere past the patient rooms. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but curiosity rooted me in place. Stepping back into the hallway, I swept my flashlight toward the sound, the beam barely cutting through the thick darkness. The corridor stretched endlessly, doors gaping open like empty sockets. The air was colder now, my breath visible in faint wisps. It felt wrong, as if something had shifted in the very structure of the building. Another sound this time, the distinct shuffle of footsteps. Slow, deliberate. My pulse pounded in my ears as I raised my camera, snapping a photo into the darkness. The flash illuminated the hallway for a brief second, and in that moment, I saw it. A figure at the end of the corridor, standing completely still. I didn't stay to take another picture. My body moved before my mind could process, turning sharply and racing back toward the way I had come. My footsteps echoed loudly, each one swallowed by the oppressive silence behind me. As I passed the patient room, my flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I saw the sheets on the bed move just the slightest shift, like someone turning over in their sleep. I didn't stop. The hospital felt alive now, as if the walls were breathing, the shadows growing heavier with every passing second. The exit sign was barely visible ahead, its red glow a beacon in the suffocating dark. I pushed myself forward, my legs burning as I finally burst into the lobby. The air outside was crisp and fresh, a stark contrast to the stagnant stillness inside. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, slamming the door shut and locking it. My chest heaved as I struggled to catch my breath, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my camera. I hesitated before looking at the last photo I had taken. The image was grainy, distorted by motion blur, but the figure was still there. Closer now. No distinct features, just the outline of a person watching. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting with unease as I quickly shut off the camera. I never went back to that hospital, but I kept the photos, unable to bring myself to delete them. Some nights I swear I see that same impression in my own bed, the faint shape of someone who shouldn't be there. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see something standing just behind me, waiting. Story 7. The house was over 100 years old, its wooden frame creaking with every step, its walls thick with history. I had rented it for the month, eager to escape the noise of the city and surround myself with quiet. The air smelled faintly of aged wood and something else, something musty that clung to the corners. The owner had mentioned the basement was used for storage, but I hadn't given it much thought until the third night. I was searching for a breaker panel after a flickering light in the kitchen caught my attention. The basement door groaned as I pulled it open, revealing a set of narrow stairs leading into darkness. A single hanging bulb barely illuminated the space, casting long shadows across old trunks and dust-covered shelves. The air was thick, the scent of damp earth filling my nose as I stepped down carefully. The breaker panel was mounted near the steps, but something else caught my attention, a seam in the brick wall near the far corner. It looked out of place, the edges too sharp, too precise compared to the aged surroundings. Running my fingers along the surface, I felt a slight gap, just wide enough to wedge my fingertips in. With a slow, hesitant pull, the bricks shifted, revealing a narrow doorway. Beyond the hidden door was a small room, no bigger than a walk-in closet, with a single overhead light casting a yellow glow. A table sat in the center, neatly set with a plate and silverware, as if someone had just stepped away from a meal. A cot rested against the far wall, its sheets crisp and untouched, while a small shelf held canned goods and bottled water. My stomach tightened as I picked up a can, the label pristine, the expiration date still years away. A chill crawled up my spine as I realized everything in the room was modern, nothing matching the age of the house. The walls were bare except for a single framed photograph sitting on the shelf. I picked it up, my breath catching as I saw the house's exterior, the same porch, the same worn shutters. But the people in the photo were unfamiliar, two men and a woman standing side by side, their expressions unreadable. The air in the room felt thick, almost suffocating, as if it had been sealed off for too long. I turned back toward the entrance, but a noise stopped me, a faint shuffling sound, like footsteps just beyond the basement stairs. My pulse quickened as I strained to listen, but the house had fallen silent again. For a moment I debated closing the door and pretending I had never found it. Instead, I stepped back into the basement, pushing the bricks back into place until they clicked. The hidden door blended seamlessly into the wall once more, as if it had never been there. I hurried up the stairs, locking the basement door behind me before leaning against it, my heart pounding. The house felt different now, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a move. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every creak and whisper of the house sent my nerves on edge, my mind replaying the image of that room over and over. If someone had been living there, where were they now? Had they left, or were they still somewhere in the house, watching? The thought sent a fresh wave of unease through me, my eyes locked on the bedroom door as if expecting it to move. By morning I had convinced myself it was nothing, maybe an old survival shelter, stocked long ago and forgotten. But as I sipped my coffee, my gaze kept drifting toward the basement door. Something didn't sit right, the way the room had felt too, lived in. I needed answers, so I decided to call the owner and ask about it. The phone rang several times before she answered, her voice warm but cautious. I kept my questions simple, asking if there had ever been renovations in the basement, if there was a hidden room she was aware of. The pause on the other end stretched too long before she finally responded. "I'd advise you not to go down there," she said quietly. "Just leave it alone." Her words sent a fresh wave of unease through me. When I pressed further, she only repeated herself before making an excuse and hanging up. My fingers tightened around the phone as I stared at the basement door, the air in the house suddenly feeling heavier. If she knew something about that room, why wouldn't she tell me? That night, I locked my bedroom door, but sleep was impossible. At some point, I thought I heard movement downstairs, the faintest rustling, like someone shifting their weight. My breath came shallow as I lay still, every nerve on high alert. The noise stopped after a few moments, leaving only the quiet hum of the house settling. By the next morning, I had made up my mind to leave. I packed quickly, stuffing my belongings into my suitcase without bothering to fold anything. But as I reached for my keys, something made me freeze, a single can of food sitting on the kitchen counter. It hadn't been there before. I had locked every door, checked every window. Someone else had been in the house. My hands shook as I grabbed my bag and yanked open the front door, stepping onto the porch without a second thought. The house loomed behind me, its windows dark and empty, but I could feel something watching. I didn't look back as I tossed my bag into the car and started the engine, the tires crunching against the gravel as I pulled away. The owner never responded to my messages after that. When I looked up the house later, I found scattered mentions of missing tenants, rumors about people who had rented it and vanished without a trace. No official reports, no investigations, just whispers, warnings that never made it to the surface. I never told anyone what I found in that basement, Some things are better left undiscovered. Story 8. The train had been packed when I boarded, every seat filled with travelers heading through the mountains. The hum of conversation and the occasional clatter of a food cart filled the carriage, creating a comforting background noise. I settled into my seat by the window, watching the dense forest blur past as the train cut through the wilderness. The rhythmic motion of the train, combined with the warmth inside, made my eyelids grow heavy. I hadn't planned to sleep, but the exhaustion of travel weighed on me. My head rested against the cool glass, and the sound of voices around me began to fade. The last thing I remembered was the train entering a long tunnel, the world outside swallowed by darkness. The steady vibration of the tracks beneath me lulled me further, and before I knew it, I had drifted off. When I woke, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The murmur of voices, the rustling of newspapers, even the faint coughs and sniffles that had been present earlier, everything was gone. My stomach twisted as I sat up, blinking against the dim light filtering through the windows. The carriage was completely empty, the seats around me vacant and untouched. I turned, expecting to see at least one other passenger, but the rows stretched behind me in eerie stillness. The train itself was still moving, the rhythmic clatter of the tracks beneath me unchanged. My breath quickened as I checked my watch, trying to gauge how long I had been asleep. The time seemed off, though I couldn't explain why. Standing slowly, I peered down the aisle, my fingers gripping the edge of the nearest seat. The luggage racks above were still full, bags and coats resting where their owners had left them. It was as if everyone had vanished in an instant, leaving behind only their belongings. The air felt heavier now, thick with something I couldn't name. I made my way toward the next carriage, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the empty space. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing another identical carriage, just as empty. My pulse pounded in my ears as I walked forward, my fingers trailing against the cool metal railing. The silence pressed against me, unnatural and absolute. I called out, my voice cracking slightly as it carried through the hollow space. There was no answer, only the endless hum of the train's engine. My hands felt clammy as I reached for my phone, but there was no signal, no bars, nothing. The outside world was still there, the mountains rolling past in the dim twilight, but inside I felt completely alone. Moving through the carriages, I searched for any sign of life. The dining car was deserted, half-eaten meals left on tables, cups of coffee gone cold. A chair sat slightly askew as if someone had just stood up, but there was no one. The train wasn't stopping, wasn't slowing down, yet every carriage I entered was the same. A cold dread settled in my chest as I reached the conductor's compartment. The door was locked, the small window in the door offering no glimpse inside. I knocked, the sound ringing sharply in the silence, but there was no response. My throat tightened as I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear anything beyond the hum of the train. Stepping back, I glanced down the corridor behind me. The overhead lights flickered once, casting long shadows along the empty seats. My breath hitched as a sudden gust of cold air brushed against my skin, though there were no open windows. The sensation was brief but unmistakable, like something had just passed by. I turned sharply, scanning the carriages, but nothing had changed. The flickering lights steadied, the silence deepened. Forcing myself to move, I retraced my steps, my eyes darting toward the abandoned belongings. Everything looked so normal, so untouched, yet the absence of people made it all feel horribly wrong. As I neared my original seat, I saw something that hadn't been there before. A single piece of paper sat on my tray table, folded neatly in half. My hands trembled as I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the slightly rough texture. Unfolding it, I stared at the message scrawled across the page in uneven handwriting. You should not be here. The words sent a chill through me, my stomach twisting in knots. I hadn't seen anyone, hadn't heard anyone, yet someone had placed this note. My eyes darted around the carriage, but nothing had changed. The train continued forward, the mountains outside shrouded in mist, stretching endlessly into the distance. Swallowing hard, I tried to steady my breathing. There had to be an explanation, some kind of trick, an elaborate prank. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Something had happened while I slept, something I couldn't understand. The train entered another tunnel, plunging everything into darkness. The air seemed to thicken around me, pressing in from all sides. I gripped the armrests, waiting for the light to return, my pulse pounding in my ears. Seconds stretched unbearably long before the glow of the carriage lights flickered back on. My breath caught in my throat. The seats were full again, every space occupied by passengers who had not been there a moment ago. Conversations hummed around me. The clatter of silverware sounded from the dining car. It was as if nothing had ever happened. I turned to the man seated beside me, my voice shaking as I asked if he had noticed anything strange. He gave me a puzzled look before shaking his head. "You've been asleep this whole time," he said with a shrug, glancing back down at his book. My hands clenched the note in my lap, but when I looked down, the paper was gone. The tray table was empty, the message erased as if it had never existed. The train continued its journey through the mountains, the world outside dark and endless. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had slipped into something beyond understanding, something that had watched me, if only for a little while. Story 9. The road leading into the ghost town was cracked and overgrown, the faded sign barely legible. The place had been abandoned for decades, its history reduced to whispers and speculation. The story was always the same: a family had vanished without a trace, leaving everything behind. No one knew what had happened to them, and no bodies were ever found. The town itself was eerie, a collection of crumbling buildings standing in defiance of time. Windows gaped open like empty eyes, doors hung loose on rusted hinges. The wind carried the scent of dry earth and decay, stirring the dust in lazy spirals. I walked cautiously, my footsteps the only sound in the hollow silence. Most of the buildings were empty, stripped of anything valuable long ago. Peeling wallpaper clung to rotting wood, and old furniture sat in disarray. It was as if the town had simply been left to wither, frozen in time. But something about the place felt wrong, as if it was waiting for something or someone. I found the house at the edge of town, its white paint faded to gray. Unlike the others, the door was still closed, the windows intact. The family had lived here, their lives once filled with routine and warmth. Now the house stood silent, a relic of something unfinished. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the stale air thick with dust. The living room was untouched, books still on the shelves, a rocking chair frozen in place. It looked as though someone had just stepped out for a moment, never to return. My pulse quickened as I moved deeper inside. The dining room stopped me cold. The table was still set for dinner, plates arranged neatly, silverware glinting under the dim light. Glasses sat half-filled with murky liquid, their contents long since evaporated. The chairs were pushed back slightly, as if their occupants had risen mid-meal and never come back. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The air was thick, heavy with something unspoken. A thin layer of dust coated everything, but the arrangement of the table remained eerily perfect. My fingers brushed the edge of a plate, and a shiver ran down my spine. Something had happened here, something sudden. The house had been abandoned in an instant, frozen at the exact moment the family had disappeared. I could almost hear the faint echoes of conversation, the clink of silverware against porcelain. It felt as though the past was lingering, refusing to fade. I turned, my gaze sweeping the room. A doorway led into the kitchen, its cabinets still stocked with faded labels and rusted cans. Pots sat on the stove, their contents long since hardened into blackened crusts. The remnants of daily life remained, undisturbed by time. Upstairs, the bedrooms told the same story. Clothes still hung in the closets, shoes neatly lined against the walls. The beds were made, blankets tucked in as if expecting their owners to return. In one room, a child's toys were scattered across the floor, a doll propped up against the pillow. A feeling of unease crawled up my spine. The town had been abandoned for decades, yet the house felt lived in, as if the family had only just left. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched, that something unseen lingered in the corners. I stepped back into the hallway, the wooden floor groaning beneath my weight. A gust of wind rattled the windows, sending a shiver through the walls. For a moment, I thought I heard a whisper, faint and distant. I held my breath, straining to listen. The sound came again, a low murmur, just beyond the dining room. My pulse pounded as I turned, my eyes locking onto the table. It was exactly as I had left it, unchanged. But the whisper persisted, slipping through the air like a forgotten memory. I took a slow step forward, the floor creaking beneath me. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. The air smelled of dust and something faintly metallic. Another step, and the whisper stopped. The house was quiet once more. A sudden chill washed over me, an unnatural cold seeping into my bones. The dust on the table swirled, disturbed by an unseen force. My breath hitched as I backed away, the feeling of being watched growing stronger. Something was here. I turned sharply, my heart hammering. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, stretching unnaturally against the dim light. The sense of presence was undeniable now, pressing against my skin like static. The house wasn't empty. It had never been. I moved quickly, my footsteps echoing through the hollow rooms. The walls felt closer, the air heavier with each passing second. The moment I stepped outside, the weight lifted, the suffocating presence fading into the wind. I exhaled, my breath unsteady. The town remained still, the buildings standing like silent sentinels. The sky had darkened, the sun dipping below the horizon. The ghost town had swallowed countless stories, its past buried beneath layers of time and dust. But some things refused to be forgotten. I glanced back at the house, its windows reflecting the dying light. The dining table remained, its place settings untouched. The meal had never ended, the chairs forever waiting for their occupants. Whatever had taken them had left no trace, no answer, only silence. I walked back to my car, my footsteps quick and deliberate. The engine roared to life, breaking the stillness that had settled over the town. As I pulled away, I stole one last glance in the rearview mirror. A shadow flickered in the window, a shape barely discernible against the darkened glass. My stomach tightened as I pressed the gas, leaving the town behind. Some places were never meant to be disturbed. Some stories were never meant to be uncovered. The road stretched ahead, empty and endless. The ghost town faded in the distance, swallowed by the twilight. But even miles away, I could still feel it, the weight of unseen eyes, the whisper of something long forgotten. The past never truly disappears. It only waits. Story 10. The road had stretched endlessly for miles, a 2-lane highway cutting through barren land. My fuel gauge hovered dangerously close to empty, and I hadn't seen another car in nearly an hour. Just when I thought I'd have to pull over and wait for help, a gas station appeared in the distance. It was small, old-fashioned, and completely isolated from anything else. I slowed down and pulled into the lot, gravel crunching beneath my tires. The station looked abandoned, yet strangely intact. The tall price sign near the road caught my eye. Gas was listed at just 63 cents per gallon. I frowned, stepping out of my car and glancing around. Everything was eerily still, the air heavy with silence. The pumps were the old-fashioned kind, with metal nozzles and manual dials instead of digital displays. A faded sign on the door read open, but the windows were coated with dust. I tried to peek inside, my breath fogging up the glass. Shelves still held snacks and supplies, but there was no movement, no sign of anyone inside. I pushed open the door, and a bell jingled weakly above me. The air inside was stale, carrying a faint hint of gasoline and old paper. A single ceiling fan spun lazily, creaking with each slow rotation. At the counter, an old cash register sat closed, its surface covered in dust. Curious, I lifted the register's drawer, expecting it to be empty. Instead, it was filled with crisp bills and neatly stacked coins, as if someone had just counted the till. My stomach tightened as I stepped back, my mind racing. Someone had left this place in a hurry, but when? And why was everything still untouched? I scanned the shelves, noticing brands of candy and soda that hadn't been sold in decades. A faded newspaper lay by the register, the edges curling with age. The date printed at the top sent a chill through me. July 12, 1978. My breath came slower as I flipped through the brittle pages, the ink smudged but readable. The front page article detailed a missing persons case, a gas station attendant who had vanished without a trace. According to the report, he had been working the night shift when he disappeared, leaving the station exactly as it was. I felt the hair on my arms rise as I looked around again. Nothing had changed since that night. I stepped back outside, my heart pounding in my chest. The sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, stretching long shadows across the cracked pavement. I glanced at the pumps again, debating whether to try them. If this place had truly been abandoned since 1978, would they even work? I reached for the nozzle, my fingers hesitant as I lifted it from its cradle. To my shock, a faint mechanical whir started from within the pump. The old dials flickered to life, rolling over to display the frozen price. I swallowed hard, trying to shake the growing unease that clawed at my mind. As I inserted the nozzle into my gas tank, a distant sound broke the silence, a faint shuffling coming from behind the station. I froze, my grip tightening around the handle. It had been soft, almost hesitant, but unmistakably real. Someone or something was back there. I turned slowly, scanning the area beyond the station. A small storage shed sat in the back, its door slightly ajar. The dimming sunlight barely reached past the entrance, leaving the interior in deep shadow. I took a hesitant step forward, my pulse pounding in my ears. A rusted sign near the shed read "Employees Only." The paint was peeling, the letters barely legible beneath the layers of dust. As I approached, the air felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't explain. I reached out, pushing the door open further, revealing the darkness inside. A single wooden chair sat in the center of the room, tipped slightly to one side. An old jacket was draped over the back, stiff with age. On the ground beneath it, a pair of work boots lay neatly side by side. The dust in the room was undisturbed, as if no one had stepped inside for decades. I turned away, my skin crawling. Something was deeply wrong with this place. I hurried back to my car, gripping the pump handle tightly. The gas was still flowing, the numbers on the dial clicking up slowly. I willed it to hurry, casting quick glances over my shoulder. The shuffling sound came again, closer this time. My breath hitched as I spotted movement near the station's entrance. The door, which had been open just moments ago, was now swinging shut on its own. I dropped the pump handle, gas spilling onto the pavement as I scrambled into my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands slick with sweat. The engine sputtered before finally roaring to life. As I hit the gas, my headlights illuminated the front of the station, revealing the glass door. For a brief second, I swore I saw a figure standing behind it, a man in an old uniform, watching me with hollow eyes. I peeled out of the lot, gravel kicking up behind me. The gas station disappeared in my rearview mirror, swallowed by the growing night. My heart slammed against my ribs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, where the lights of civilization finally brought me some relief. At a small diner, I tried to make sense of what had happened. I told the waitress about the gas station, about the price signs frozen in time and the untouched register. Her face paled as she set down my coffee. "That station burned down in 1978, she said quietly. "The owner disappeared, and no one ever found him." My hands trembled as I gripped the mug, my mind struggling to process her words. I had just been there, had seen it with my own eyes. But if the station had burned down decades ago, what had I stepped into? And worse, what had been watching me from inside? I never drove that route again. Whatever had lingered at that station, frozen in time, had not been meant for the living. And deep in the endless stretch of highway, it was still waiting. Story 11. The sun had just set when I decided to take a detour off the highway, hoping to shave some time off my drive. My GPS showed a narrow country road that curved through farmland and dense patches of trees. The road was quiet, the only signs of life being the occasional farmhouse in the distance. I kept my eyes on the fading light, wanting to reach the main road before full darkness set in. After about 10 minutes of driving, I passed an old gas station sitting alone by the roadside. Its neon sign flickered weakly, casting a dull glow onto the cracked pavement. There were no cars at the pumps, and the small convenience store attached to it looked dark and empty. Something about it felt off, but I didn't dwell on it as I kept driving forward, following the winding road. Another 20 minutes passed, and the road stretched on without any intersections or turns. I kept my hands steady on the wheel, humming softly to the radio. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it again, the same gas station, sitting in the same spot, its flickering sign barely illuminating the empty lot. My stomach twisted as I slowed down, staring at the building. I was sure I had been driving in a straight line. I checked my GPS, but the screen stuttered, the map refusing to load. The little blue dot marking my location flickered before vanishing entirely. Frustrated, I tried refreshing it, but the screen remained blank. I took a deep breath and reasoned with myself maybe I had unknowingly looped around on a hidden curve. Determined to figure it out, I kept driving, keeping track of every landmark I passed. The road remained eerily familiar, with the same clusters of trees and fields rolling by on either side. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as minutes stretched into another half hour. Then, like a bad joke, the gas station appeared again, its empty parking lot unchanged, its neon sign still struggling to stay lit. This time my hands grew clammy, and a deep unease settled in my chest. I pulled over, stepping out of the car and into the cool night air. The silence pressed down around me, heavier than it should have been. No wind rustled the trees, no distant animals called out. I turned back to my car, the headlights casting long shadows across the pavement. My gut told me to leave, to keep driving and not stop again. Back behind the wheel, I pressed the gas harder, watching the road closely for any signs of a turnoff. I was done trying to save time. I just wanted to find my way back to the highway. The minutes crawled by, but no exits appeared. No intersections split the road. I felt like I was moving forward, but with each mile, a sickening sense of déjà vu crept in. When the gas station came into view for the fourth time, my breath caught in my throat. The air inside the car felt stifling, the atmosphere thick with something I couldn't explain. The station looked exactly the same, no signs of movement, no changes, as if it had been waiting for me. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, panic bubbling up in my chest. I slammed my foot on the gas, pushing my car faster down the road. The trees blurred past, and the dark horizon stretched endlessly ahead. My heart pounded as I forced myself to focus, refusing to believe what was happening. I counted every mile, every second, every landmark I passed, desperate for something new, something different. And then the gas station reappeared, like a cruel trick. My breath hitched, and my stomach twisted violently. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the pavement as my car skidded to a stop. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't me looping around. I was trapped. The neon light of the sign buzzed softly in the still night, its glow flickering in an almost rhythmic pattern. I stared at it, my mind racing. Maybe I needed to go inside, see if there was someone there who could explain what was happening. The idea sent a shiver through me, but sitting in my car, stuck in this endless loop, was worse. I stepped out cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the empty lot. The air smelled stale, tinged with something metallic beneath it. As I approached the door, I noticed the glass was smeared with dust, as if it hadn't been cleaned in years. I hesitated before pushing it open, a small bell jingling overhead. Inside, the store was dimly lit by a few buzzing fluorescent lights. Rows of shelves stood stocked with old snacks and canned goods, their labels faded and peeling. A thick layer of dust coated everything, undisturbed for what looked like years. Behind the counter, a cash register sat untouched, a thin film of grime covering its surface. Then I heard it. A faint rustling sound coming from the back of the store. My pulse pounded as I turned my head toward the noise. The door to the storage room was slightly ajar, the darkness beyond it stretching like an open maw. I swallowed hard, every instinct in my body screaming at me to leave. A shadow moved. Just a flicker, barely noticeable, but I saw it. My breath caught as I took a slow step back, trying not to make a sound. The rustling grew louder, shifting into something closer to breathing. Then, the storage room door creaked open another inch. I didn't wait. I turned on my heel and bolted out of the store, my heart slamming against my ribs. I dove into my car, locking the doors as I started the engine. My hands trembled as I gripped the wheel, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror. The gas station sat silent, unchanged, but something deep inside told me I wasn't alone anymore. I floored the gas, the tires kicking up gravel as I sped down the road. The wind howled past my windows, the darkness stretching endlessly ahead. My mind raced with the possibility that I would see that station again, that I would be caught in this loop forever. But as the minutes passed, something shifted. The trees thinned, and up ahead, a bright green highway sign glowed in the distance. Relief crashed over me as I swerved onto the on-ramp, merging onto the familiar stretch of highway. My hands still shook, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I glanced in the mirror one last time, half expecting to see that gas station waiting for me, but it was gone. I never took that road again. Even now, when I drive through unfamiliar places, I keep a close watch on the signs, on the buildings I pass, because sometimes the road doesn't let go, and sometimes you don't make it out. Story 12. The boarding house was one of the oldest buildings in town, a restored relic from the late 1800s. Its wooden exterior was painted a deep burgundy, with ornate trim and wide wraparound porches. The owner, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Calloway, welcomed me warmly and led me to my room. She mentioned that the house had a rich history, once serving as a home for weary travelers passing through the area. The room itself was cozy, with antique furniture and a large four-poster bed. The air smelled faintly of old wood and lavender, a comforting but slightly melancholic scent. I unpacked my bag, enjoying the quiet, and settled in for the night. The house had a peaceful stillness, the kind that only old buildings seem to hold. At some point past midnight, I was pulled from sleep by a faint creaking sound. I lay still, listening as the noise grew clearer, footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing directly above me. My heart thudded in my chest as I counted each measured step, moving back and forth. The sound went on for what felt like an eternity before finally stopping. In the morning, I mentioned the noise to Miss Calloway over breakfast. She smiled politely but didn't seem concerned, brushing it off as the house settling. I almost accepted that explanation, but something about the pacing had felt too precise, too intentional. I let it go, convincing myself that old buildings always made strange noises. That night, the footsteps returned, starting around the same time as before. The slow, rhythmic steps moved from one end of the ceiling to the other, as if someone were pacing in deep thought. A cold unease crept over me as I lay there, gripping the covers tightly. I reminded myself that this was a historic home. Maybe there was attic space above me, or another section of the house I hadn't seen. In the morning, I casually asked one of the other guests if they had heard anything during the night. They shook their heads, saying they had slept soundly. When I brought it up to Miss Calloway again, she hesitated for the briefest moment before offering me another vague reassurance. Her reaction left me unsettled, as if there was something she wasn't telling me. Determined to put my mind at ease, I spent the afternoon exploring the house. The layout was simple: several guest rooms on the main floor, a dining area, and a small parlor. But as I wandered through the hallways, something gnawed at me. There was no staircase, no upper floor, no attic space. There was nothing above my room at all. A chill ran through me as I replayed the sound of the footsteps in my mind. If there was no second floor, then where had they been coming from? I tried to reason with myself, telling myself that old houses had their quirks, that sounds could travel strangely through old wood. But deep down, I knew this was something else. That night I lay awake, waiting. The house was silent at first, the only sounds the distant chirping of crickets outside. But then, right on cue, the footsteps began again. My breath caught in my throat as I listened, each step echoing above me in that same deliberate rhythm. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, but the sound was too clear, too real. I forced myself to move, slowly sitting up and turning on the bedside lamp. The warm glow did little to ease the dread creeping over me. Swallowing hard, I reached for my phone and opened the voice recorder. I needed proof. I held my breath, watching the screen as the audio levels spiked with each step. Summoning my courage, I whispered, "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped immediately. My skin prickled as the silence stretched, heavy and oppressive. I stared up at the ceiling, my pulse hammering, waiting for something, anything to happen. Then, a single, deliberate step echoed directly above me. My stomach clenched as I scrambled out of bed, my heart slamming against my ribs. I grabbed my phone and rushed to the door, barely pausing to throw on my shoes. The hallway was empty, the house eerily quiet, as if nothing had happened at all. I made my way to the front desk, my hands still shaking as I knocked on Mrs. Calloway's door. She answered almost immediately, her expression unreadable as she took one look at my face. Without me saying a word, she stepped aside and gestured for me to come in. Sitting in the dimly lit parlor, she finally spoke. "You heard them, didn't you?" Her voice was soft, but there was no surprise in it. I nodded, my throat dry, and she sighed, as if she had been expecting this. She told me the house had once had a second floor, long ago. It had been removed after a fire had badly damaged it over a century ago. A guest, a man traveling alone, had been staying in the upper room when the fire broke out. Trapped by the flames, he had paced the floor, calling for help, but no one had been able to reach him in time. "They say he never left," she murmured, staring into the flickering light of the fireplace. "Every night he walks, waiting for a way out that never comes." A heavy silence settled between us, the weight of her words sinking in. I wanted to disbelieve it, to chalk it up to superstition, but I had heard it with my own ears. The next morning I packed my bags, unwilling to spend another night in that room. As I handed Miss Calloway my key, she gave me a knowing look but didn't try to stop me. "Some things are best left undisturbed," she said quietly. I nodded, understanding that whatever haunted this house had been here long before me and would remain long after I was gone. As I drove away, I glanced back at the house one last time. It stood there, silent and unassuming, its history woven into the very walls. I told myself I would forget about it, that I would leave the past where it belonged. But some nights, in the quiet hours just before dawn, I swear I still hear those footsteps pacing above me, waiting for an escape that will never come. Story 13. The campsite was quiet when I arrived, tucked deep within the woods near an old battlefield. I had read about the history of the land, how soldiers had fought and died there long ago, but the place felt peaceful now. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine, and the trees stretched high above, their branches swaying gently. I set up my tent near a clearing, where the moonlight would keep the darkness from feeling too oppressive. As night fell, the forest seemed to close in, the once familiar sounds of birds and rustling leaves replaced by an eerie silence. My campfire crackled, its glow barely reaching beyond the small circle of light it provided. I ate a quick meal and sat for a while staring into the flames, listening to the occasional snap of a twig in the distance. It was easy to imagine ghosts lingering here, remnants of a violent past still echoing through the land. I finally crawled into my tent, zipping myself inside against the creeping chill. The stillness outside felt unnatural, but exhaustion dulled my unease, and I drifted into a restless sleep. At some point in the night, I thought I heard something soft shuffling, the faintest whisper of movement just beyond my tent. My eyes snapped open, and I held my breath, straining to hear, but all was silent again. Morning came slowly, the pale light filtering through the fabric of my tent. A strange sensation settled in my chest, as if something was off, though I couldn't yet place what. Pushing aside my sleeping bag, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, stretching against the stiffness in my limbs. That was when I saw them, the footprints. They circled my tent in an unbroken line, pressed deep into the damp earth. They were barefoot, the impressions eerily clear, each toe perfectly outlined in the dirt. My stomach tightened as I crouched down, following the strange pattern with my eyes. The prints never led toward or away from the tent, only around it, looping endlessly as if someone had walked in circles through the night. A cold dread seeped into my bones as I stood, scanning the area for any sign of who or what had made them. There were no other disturbances in the ground, no sign of an approach or departure. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. Something had been outside my tent all night, moving without ever arriving or leaving. I forced myself to stay calm, telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the footprints were already there when I arrived, a trick of my flashlight making me overlook them the night before. But as I looked closer, I noticed the fresh dampness of the prints, as if they had been made just hours ago. The thought made my skin crawl. Packing up quickly, I kept glancing over my shoulder, my nerves on edge. The trees felt different now, less welcoming, their shadows deeper, darker. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though I saw nothing but the swaying branches. Every crunch of leaves beneath my boots made me flinch, as if expecting a response. I reached my car and threw my gear inside, eager to leave the place behind. Just as I opened the driver's door, a gust of wind rushed through the trees, carrying with it a faint whisper. It sounded almost like words, a hushed murmur that sent a chill down my spine. I didn't stay to listen. I got in, turned the key, and sped down the dirt road without looking back. Hours later, I found myself unable to shake the unease. My mind kept replaying the footprints, the unbroken circle, the eerie silence of the night. Curiosity warred with dread, pushing me to search for answers. I pulled into a roadside diner, hoping a warm meal would clear my head. An older man behind the counter noticed my unease and asked where I had been camping. When I told him, his expression darkened, and he exchanged a glance with another customer. "That land's got history," he said, his voice low. "Soldiers died there, some never buried proper. Folks say they still walk those woods, looking for something, maybe just someone to know they were there." The words sent a fresh wave of chills through me. The footprints had been barefoot, not the kind left by modern hikers. They had walked in circles, endlessly, as if lost. I thought of the whispers in the wind, the way the night had felt unnervingly still. It all made sense in a way I didn't want to acknowledge. I left the diner feeling heavier, as if the past had reached out and brushed against me. That night, I dreamed of shadows moving through the trees, their bare feet pressing into the earth in slow, deliberate steps. I woke with the sensation of being watched, though my room was empty. The feeling never truly left me. Story 14. The road stretched endlessly before me, the golden fields of the Midwest blurring into the horizon. My road trip had been spontaneous, a way to clear my mind and escape the monotony of everyday life. I had no real destination, just a full tank of gas and an open map. The back roads were quiet, the occasional farmhouse or gas station breaking up the vast emptiness. As I drove past a faded billboard, something caught my eye in the distance. Peeking through a line of overgrown trees was the unmistakable outline of a Ferris wheel. My curiosity got the better of me, and I turned onto a narrow dirt road leading toward it. The further I went, the more the trees gave way to rusted attractions and crumbling buildings. I had stumbled upon an abandoned amusement park. The entrance arch still stood, its paint peeling and the words barely legible. The ticket booths were covered in grime, their windows shattered. Vines had crawled over the fences, reclaiming the park in nature's slow, steady grip. I parked my car and stepped out, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and rust. I wandered through the park, taking in the eerie silence. The bumper cars sat frozen in time, their once bright colors dulled by years of neglect. The roller coaster tracks twisted overhead, skeletal remains of what must have once been a thrilling ride. The place felt frozen, like it had been left in a hurry, abandoned without a second thought. Then I heard it. Faint at first, almost like a trick of the wind, but growing clearer with each step. The unmistakable sound of carousel music drifted through the air. My pulse quickened as I followed the sound, weaving through rusting concession stands and broken-down game booths. The melody was cheerful, out of place in the desolation. Rounding a corner, I finally saw it. The carousel stood in the center of a cracked courtyard, its paint chipped and faded. Despite its age, the ride was in motion, the ornate horses bobbing up and down. The music played from unseen speakers, the notes warbling as if from an old record. I took a hesitant step forward, my breath hitching. There was no power, no sign of life, yet the carousel turned. The wooden horses stared ahead with hollow eyes, their expressions frozen in time. Some were missing chunks of their bodies, their manes carved in elegant swirls now splintered and worn. I circled the ride, searching for an explanation. A hidden generator, some kind of timer set decades ago. But the control panel was rusted over, the buttons broken beyond repair. There was no logical reason for it to be working. And yet, it was. A cold breeze swept through the park, sending a shiver down my spine. The music continued, each note sending a ripple of unease through my body. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my feet felt rooted in place. I watched as the horses bobbed, their movement too smooth, too fluid for something abandoned. Then, I saw it. A shadow just on the edge of my vision, standing near the entrance to the carousel. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. My pulse pounded in my ears as I scanned the park, the silence pressing in once more. The wind stirred the leaves, but the feeling remained. I wasn't alone. Forcing my legs to move, I stepped onto the carousel platform. The wood creaked beneath my weight as I reached for one of the horses. Its paint flaked under my touch, but it felt solid, real. I hesitated before gripping the brass pole, expecting it to be cold, but it was strangely warm, almost like someone had just touched it before me. The ride continued to spin, its slow rotation feeling hypnotic. I glanced up at the mirrors lining the central column, their surfaces cloudy with age. My reflection was distorted, the dim light casting strange shapes around me. Then, in the corner of the mirror, I saw it again. A figure standing just beyond the carousel, motionless. I spun around, my heart hammering. The space was empty. My breath came in quick, shallow bursts as I stumbled backward off the platform. The music warbled, distorting into something less playful, something wrong. I backed away, my mind screaming for me to run. The wind picked up, swirling dust and leaves around me as the ride slowed. The horses came to a stop, the music cutting off mid-note. The silence was deafening. I turned on my heel and sprinted back the way I had come, my pulse roaring in my ears. Reaching my car, I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling. I cast one last glance toward the carousel. It was still. The park was silent once more, as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. Something was there. I threw the car into drive, speeding down the dirt road without looking back. The trees blurred past, the open highway coming into view like a beacon. My breathing slowed only when I was miles away, the distant glow of the town ahead grounding me. I never figured out what kept that carousel turning. I never told anyone what I saw. But sometimes, when I drive down empty roads, I swear I hear faint, distant music drifting through the air. And I never stop to listen. Story 15. The bed and breakfast sat on the outskirts of town, an old Victorian house with a wraparound porch and ivy creeping up its faded blue walls. It had a charm to it, the kind that made you feel like you were stepping back in time. The owner, a soft-spoken woman named Margaret, greeted me at the front desk with a warm but distant smile. She handed me the key to room 6 and told me breakfast would be served at 7 sharp. The hallway leading to my room smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, the floors creaking beneath my steps. The wallpaper, a faded floral print, peeled at the edges, revealing glimpses of the plaster beneath. My door was already ajar, as if someone had been inside just moments before. I hesitated and pushed it open fully, stepping inside. The room was cozy, with a large bed against one wall and a small writing desk beneath a wide window. A wooden wardrobe stood in the corner, its doors slightly open. My suitcase should have been beside the bed where I had set it down at check-in, but it wasn't there. My stomach tightened as I turned toward the closet. The doors creaked as I pulled them open, revealing my clothes neatly hung on wooden hangers. My shoes were lined up at the bottom, and my toiletries were arranged on the small shelf above. It was as if I had been here for days, settling in like a long-time guest. But I had only just arrived, and no one had entered my room. I took a step back, my breath coming a little too fast. The door had been unlocked when I arrived. Maybe the owner had taken the liberty of unpacking for me. Why? And when? I hadn't seen or heard anyone near my room. My fingers twitched as I reached for my phone, but there was no service. Swallowing my unease, I moved my suitcase back to the floor and began checking through my belongings. Nothing was missing, nothing out of place beyond the eerie fact that I hadn't done any of it myself. I pushed the thought away, telling myself it was just an odd but harmless hospitality gesture. I'd ask Margaret about it in the morning. Night fell quickly, the old house settling into a silence that felt too thick, too complete. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening for any sounds of movement in the hallway. The wind whispered outside, rustling the tree branches against my window. Just as I was beginning to drift off, I heard something soft and deliberate, like the rustle of fabric. I sat up instantly, my pulse quickening. The sound came from the closet, a faint shifting of hangers against the wooden rod. The air in the room felt different now, charged with something unseen. Holding my breath, I reached for the lamp on the bedside table and flicked it on. The yellow glow spilled across the room, but everything looked the same. Slowly, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood, my bare feet pressing into the cool wooden floor. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I took a cautious step toward the wardrobe. The doors were closed, just as I had left them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different, that something or someone was waiting inside. With a trembling hand, I grasped the handle and pulled. The doors swung open, revealing my clothes still hanging neatly in place. But the air inside was colder than the rest of the room, and that same faint scent of lavender drifted out. My pulse steadied slightly as I exhaled, feeling foolish for my paranoia, just my imagination, nothing more. I turned away, ready to close the doors, when I caught a glimpse of something in the small mirror on the inside panel. A reflection distorted and faint standing just behind me. My stomach dropped as a chill shot down my spine. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just my empty room, silent as ever. The bed suddenly looked far less inviting, but I forced myself to return to it. Whatever I had seen, it was just a trick of the dim light, a trick of a tired mind. I climbed under the blankets, keeping my gaze away from the closet, and pulled them up to my chin. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. A noise jolted me awake. It wasn't loud, but it was close, too close. My breath caught as I listened, heart thudding. It was the unmistakable sound of a drawer sliding open, my nightstand. I turned my head slowly, afraid of what I might see. The drawer was open an inch, just enough to reveal the dark space inside. My hand shook as I reached out and pulled it the rest of the way open. My phone, which I had left on the desk, was now inside, screen facing up, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. A chill settled deep into my bones. I hadn't moved it. I knew that for certain. The air in the room was suddenly too still, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move, to get out of that bed and leave. I grabbed my bag, not caring about anything else, and hurried toward the door. My fingers fumbled with the lock, my breath ragged in my chest. Finally, the knob turned, and I yanked the door open, stepping into the hallway. It was empty, eerily silent, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Downstairs, the front desk was vacant, the antique clock on the wall reading just past 3 a.m. I had no desire to wait until morning. I left my key on the counter and stepped out into the cold night air, the damp wind clinging to my skin like a warning. As I reached my car, I glanced back at the house. The window to room 6 was dark, just as it should have been. But as I turned the key in the ignition, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The curtains in my room fluttered slightly, as if someone inside had just let them go. I didn't wait to find out more. The engine roared to life, and I sped away, leaving the house and whatever lingered inside far behind me. I never asked Margaret about my suitcase, never searched for an explanation. Some things are better left unknown. Determined to prove to myself that there was an explanation, I decided to set up my own camera. I placed my phone on my desk, angled toward the frames, and started recording. I left it running as I went about my morning, checking every so often to make sure it was still recording properly. If something happened again, I would have proof. Hours passed and nothing moved. The frames stayed exactly where I had placed them. I started to feel foolish, thinking maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I had accidentally bumped them before bed and did not realize it. By the time night came, I was starting to convince myself that I had been overreacting. I set up the camera again before going to sleep, leaving the phone plugged in so it would record all night. I made sure everything was secure, then crawled into bed, trying to push the fear away. Eventually, sleep took over, but it was restless and filled with uneasy dreams. When I woke up, my heart was already pounding before I even opened my eyes. I turned my head toward the wall, my stomach twisting. The frames had moved again. This time they were shifted slightly upward, just enough to make it clear that it had happened while I slept. My hands felt cold as I reached for my phone, my breath catching as I checked the recording. I watched the footage with growing anxiety, fast-forwarding through the hours of stillness. Then, sometime after 3 in the morning, I saw it. The frames moved. Not all at once, not in a sudden jerk, but slowly, one by one. There was no visible force, no hand reaching out, no sign of anyone in the room. They simply slid into their new positions, as if an invisible presence had adjusted them with careful precision. I stared at the screen, my body frozen with fear. There was no logical explanation for what I was seeing. My apartment was empty. I had locked everything. There was no one there. Yet something had moved those frames, and now I had proof. A deep unease settled in my chest as I slowly put the phone down. I could not stay here. I did not know what was happening, but I knew I could not spend another night in this apartment. I packed a bag with the essentials, grabbed my keys, and walked out without looking back. I never found out what caused it. I moved out shortly after, leaving everything behind except for the proof on my phone. I never watched the footage again, never told anyone the full story. All I knew was that, whatever had been there, it had been watching, waiting, moving things in the smallest ways just to let me know it was real. Story 25. I found the letter in my mailbox in the early morning, wedged between a few bills and advertisements. The envelope was plain, with no return address or markings. My name was written in neat, almost perfect handwriting across the front. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake, maybe a misplaced note meant for someone else. But when I opened it, my stomach tightened. Inside was a single piece of paper with 4 words written in the same precise handwriting. "I am still watching." I read the words again, my hands suddenly feeling cold. The message was brief, but it sent a chill through me. There was no explanation, no signature, nothing to indicate who had sent it. My eyes scanned the street, but everything looked normal. Neighbors were leaving for work, cars passed by, and the air smelled like morning rain. There was no sign that anyone had been watching, but the letter made me feel like I was being observed even now. I stepped back inside and locked the door behind me. My mind raced with questions. Was this some kind of joke? A prank from someone who thought it would be funny to scare me? I tried to think of anyone who might do something like this, but no one came to mind. There had been no arguments, no conflicts, no reason for anyone to send me a message like that. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I checked the envelope again, looking for any clues I might have missed. The paper was standard, the ink was black, and the handwriting was unnervingly neat. There were no smudges, no stray marks, nothing out of place. Whoever had written this had taken their time. I flipped the envelope over, but it was just as blank as the front. No postmark, no stamp. That meant it had not been mailed, it had been delivered by hand. The thought made my skin crawl. Someone had come up to my house, placed this in my mailbox, and left without a trace. I tried to remember if I had heard anything during the night, but nothing stood out. No footsteps, no strange noises, nothing unusual. I looked out the window again, half expecting to see someone standing on the sidewalk, watching. But there was no one. No. I grabbed my phone and took a picture of the letter, unsure of what to do next. Calling the police seemed extreme. There was no actual threat, just an unsettling message. If I reported it, what would I even say? That someone had left a vague note that made me uncomfortable. It was not illegal to leave a letter in someone's mailbox. But something about this felt deliberate, calculated. I decided to go about my day as normally as possible, but the letter stayed on my mind. Every time I stepped outside, I felt exposed. Every time I glanced at my phone, I expected another message to appear. By evening, the tension had not faded. I made sure all my doors and windows were locked before turning off the lights. As I lay in bed, the words kept repeating in my mind. I am still watching. Sleep did not come easily. Every creak of the house, every sound from outside made me uneasy. I told myself it was nothing, just a prank. But I could not shake the feeling that someone had been near my home, close enough to leave that letter. The next morning I checked my mailbox again, half expecting another note. But there was nothing, no sign that anyone had been back. I tried to move on, telling myself it had been a one-time thing. Days passed and nothing else happened. No strange letters, no unusual activity, no sense of being watched. I started to convince myself that it had been nothing more than a bad joke. Maybe someone had left it at random, just to get a reaction. But then a week later I found another letter. This time it was not in my mailbox. It was inside my house, sitting neatly on my kitchen counter. Story 26. I was exhausted when I got home that night. Work had drained me, and all I wanted was to take a shower and sleep. As I reached for my keys, something on the lock caught my eye. A single strand of hair was wrapped tightly around it. My first thought was that it had gotten caught there by accident, but as I looked closer, I saw that it was deliberately knotted. It was long and dark, nothing like my own. A chill ran down my spine as I stood there staring at it. I lived alone, and no one else had access to my door. I glanced around the hallway, but everything was quiet. My neighbors' doors were closed, and there was no sign of anyone lingering nearby. I hesitated before pulling my key from my pocket. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I had nowhere else to go. Carefully, I removed the hair from the lock and unlocked my door. The moment I stepped inside, I paused. Something felt off, though I could not immediately tell what it was. The lights were off, just as I had left them. Everything looked the same, but the air inside felt different, like someone else had been there. I locked the door behind me and checked the windows. They were still shut, and nothing appeared out of place. I moved cautiously through the apartment, checking every room. My bed was undisturbed, my closet untouched, and my kitchen looked the same. Still, I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. I checked the front door again, making sure it was locked, then grabbed a chair and placed it under the handle. It was a small precaution, but it made me feel a little safer. I sat on my couch trying to calm myself down. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the hair had gotten caught on my lock by accident. But the way it had been tied did not feel like a coincidence. It felt intentional, like a message left behind for me to find. I grabbed my phone and searched for anything that could explain it. I came across old stories about people marking homes they wanted to break into. Some used chalk, others left objects behind as signals, but a hair tied around a lock. That was something I had never heard of before. I barely slept that night. Every small sound made me jump, and I kept getting up to check the door. The next morning, I was still on edge as I left for work. I hesitated before locking the door, half expecting to see another strand of hair, but there was nothing. The day passed slowly, my mind replaying the strange incident over and over. By the time I got home, the sun had already set. I approached my door cautiously, scanning the lock before touching it. There was nothing there, no hair, no sign of anything unusual. I let out a breath of relief and unlocked the door. As I stepped inside, I immediately noticed the change. The air smelled slightly different, as if someone had been inside while I was gone. My heart pounded as I checked the apartment again. Everything was in its place, but I could not shake the feeling that something had been moved. I checked my closet and under my bed, feeling ridiculous but unable to stop myself. When I opened the bathroom cabinet, I froze. My toothbrush was wet. I had not used it since the previous morning. I stared at it, feeling my stomach twist. Someone had been here. Someone had touched my things. I grabbed my phone and called the building manager. I asked if anyone had entered my apartment, but they said there were no maintenance requests for my unit. My door had been locked when I arrived, with no signs of forced entry. That meant whoever had been inside either had a key or had found another way in. I hung up and sat on my couch, trying to think. Had someone been coming in while I was at work? Had they been in my apartment before I even noticed? The idea made my skin crawl. I decided I needed proof. I ordered a small security camera online, one I could hide near the door. Until it arrived, I made sure to check the lock every time I left or came home. The next morning, everything seemed normal again. No strange signs, no unusual smells. I left for work feeling slightly more at ease, convincing myself that maybe it had been my imagination. But when I returned that night, my blood ran cold. Another strand of hair was tied around my lock. This time I did not touch it. I backed away from the door and took a picture before calling the police. I told them everything that had happened, from the first strand of hair to the feeling that someone had been inside my apartment. The officer on the phone asked if anything had been stolen. I told them no, but that did not make me feel any safer. They said they would send someone over. When the officers arrived, they examined the lock but found no signs of forced entry. They walked through my apartment, checking the windows and doors. They asked if I had noticed anything missing, and I told them about the toothbrush. One of the officers nodded thoughtfully before looking at me. He said that sometimes intruders do not break in to steal. Sometimes they just want to be inside. That thought made my skin crawl. The officers suggested changing my locks and installing extra security. They also told me to call immediately if I noticed anything else unusual. After they left, I removed the strand of hair with a tissue, not wanting to touch it with my bare hands. I double-checked my windows and pushed my couch against the door before going to bed. The security camera arrived the next day and I set it up near the entrance, angled to capture the front door. That night, I could barely sleep, wondering if I would wake up to another hair on the lock. But when I checked in the morning, the lock was clear. Nothing was out of place. It was the first time in days that I felt a little bit of relief. I left for work, but my mind was still on the camera. When I got home that evening, I checked the footage immediately. Most of the recording was just empty footage of my front door. But then, at exactly 3 p.m, movement caught my eye. Someone had approached my door. The figure was mostly out of the frame, but I could see their hand reaching toward the lock. They stood there for a long moment before stepping back. Then the hand came into view again, and I watched as they carefully wrapped something around the lock. My breath caught as I saw the strand of hair being tied in place. I rewound the footage, trying to get a better look. The person was wearing dark clothing, their face hidden from view. They moved slowly, deliberately, as if they had done this before. When they were finished, they stood still for a moment before walking away. My hand shook as I paused the video. Someone had been marking my door. I called the police again and showed them the footage. They took it seriously this time, assuring me they would look into it. They asked if I recognized anything about the person, but their face had been hidden the entire time. Still, I felt better knowing that I had proof now. The next day, I had my locks changed and installed a second security camera. I never found out who had been marking my door or why they had done it. The police never caught the person, but after that night, the hair never appeared again. Whatever game they had been playing, it seemed they had moved on. I was left with unanswered questions, but I was just grateful that it was over. Story 27. I first noticed it a few weeks ago. At first I thought it was just my imagination or maybe someone passing by, but it kept happening. Every night when I looked out my window, there was someone standing across the street. The person never moved much, only standing there, watching. They always wore the same clothes, a long dark coat and a hat that covered most of their face. At first I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just someone waiting for someone else. But as the nights went on, the figure was always there. No matter what time I looked outside, they were standing in the same spot. It did not matter if it was early in the evening or late at night. The presence started to make me uneasy, but I convinced myself it was just a coincidence. One night I decided to stay up later than usual. I wanted to see if the person would eventually leave. I turned off all the lights in my room and kept an eye on the street. Hours passed, and they remained in the same spot. I could not see their face, but I could feel their gaze. A chill ran down my spine, and I stepped away from the window. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I could not shake the feeling that something was not right. The next day, I tried to go about my routine as usual. I told myself I would not look outside that night, but as soon as darkness fell, My curiosity got the best of me. I peeked out the window, and there they were. This time I decided to take action. I walked to my front door and stepped outside, hoping to get a closer look. As soon as I did, the person turned and walked away. They did not run or hurry, just calmly disappeared into the night. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. I felt relieved but also unsettled. The next night, I looked again, hoping they would not be there. But as soon as I glanced outside, I saw them in the same spot. This time I decided to confront them. I grabbed my phone and stepped outside again. As I moved closer, I could see they were slightly taller than me. Their face remained hidden beneath the hat. I called out, asking them what they wanted. They did not respond. Instead, they turned around and walked away, just like before. I felt a mix of frustration and fear. I did not understand why they kept showing up but never spoke. I considered calling the police, but I had no proof they were doing anything wrong. The next day, I told a few people about what was happening. Most of them said it was probably nothing, just someone passing by or maybe a neighbor. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The way they stood there every night, always watching, made me feel uneasy. I decided to set up a camera by my window to see if I could capture anything unusual. That night, I made sure to record everything. I watched from my window, waiting for them to appear. Sure enough, as soon as the sun set, they were there. I kept the camera rolling, hoping to catch something that would explain what was happening. But the more I watched, the more uncomfortable I became. Something about their presence felt wrong. Even though they were just standing there, I could feel the weight of their stare. I decided to check the footage the next morning to see if I had captured anything strange. When I reviewed the recording, I saw them standing in the same spot for hours without moving. What made my heart race was that at one point they seemed to take a step closer to my house. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but it was enough to make me uneasy. I decided I needed to do something. That night I waited by the door, determined to confront them again. As soon as I saw them outside, I stepped out and walked toward them. This time I refused to let them walk away without answers. I demanded to know why they were watching me. The person did not speak, but for the first time they turned their heads slightly as if acknowledging my presence. My heart pounded in my chest as I took another step forward. They stood still for a moment, then slowly lifted their head just enough for me to see part of their face. It was not what I expected. Their eyes looked empty, almost lifeless. I felt a wave of fear wash over me, but I refused to back down. I reached for my phone, ready to call the police, but before I could dial, they turned and walked away again. This time they did not stop at the corner like before. They kept walking until they disappeared into the darkness. I stood there for a long moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That was the last night I saw them. Days passed, and they never returned. I checked outside every night, expecting to see them again, but the street remained empty. Part of me felt relieved, but another part of me wondered why they had left so suddenly. I never got any answers, and that unsettled me more than anything. Even though they were gone, the feeling of being watched never completely faded. Every time I stepped outside at night, I found myself looking around, expecting to see them again. But they never returned. I eventually removed the camera and tried to put the experience behind me. As time went on, the fear started to fade. I convinced myself that whoever they were, they had no reason to come back. Maybe they had found what they were looking for, or maybe they had simply grown tired of standing there. Either way, I was grateful they were gone. Now, whenever I look out my window at night, I no longer see that familiar figure. The street is quiet again, just as it should be. But no matter how much time passes, I will never forget the way they watched me. I may never know why they were there, but I am just glad they are gone. Story 28. The package was small, unmarked, and arrived without warning. I did not remember ordering anything, and there was no return address. The only thing inside was a USB drive resting in the bottom of the padded envelope. I turned it over in my hand, wondering who could have sent it. Curiosity got the best of me, and I plugged it into my laptop. There was only one file, a video with no title or description. I hesitated for a moment before clicking on it, unsure of what to expect. The screen flickered to life, showing a grainy image of my house at night. The angle was from outside, facing my bedroom window. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the person behind the camera had been standing there watching me. A figure emerged from the darkness, barely visible against the night sky. They were still, unmoving, just standing there. The timestamp in the corner showed that the video had been recorded just a few nights ago. A shiver ran down my spine as I tried to remember if I had noticed anything unusual that night. My blinds were usually closed, but had I left them open? I paused the video and glanced over my shoulder, suddenly aware of how quiet my house was. My hands felt clammy as I restarted the footage, hoping to see some identifying feature. The figure did not move for several minutes, just staring in my direction. Then, without warning, they stepped closer, the grainy image making it hard to make out any details. The person reached into their pocket and pulled out something small. My heart pounded as I leaned in, trying to see what it was. The camera shook slightly, and the person turned away, disappearing into the darkness. The video ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the screen. I rewound it, watching again, searching for anything I might have missed. There was no sound, no voice, nothing that gave me any clues. I checked the properties of the file, but there was no information about who recorded it. My mind raced through possibilities. Was this some kind of joke? A prank by someone who knew me? Or was it something far worse? I shut my laptop and stood up, walking to the window. The street outside was empty, only the faint glow of a distant street lamp breaking the darkness. I checked the lock, even though I knew it was secure. My house had never felt unsafe before, but now I could not shake the feeling of being watched. Sleep did not come easily that night. Every sound made me sit up, my heart pounding. I kept thinking about the video, about the person standing outside. Who were they? What did they want? The worst part was not knowing if they had come back since then. The next morning, I decided to check the security cameras around my house. I rarely looked at the footage, but now it felt necessary. I scrolled through the past few nights, scanning for any sign of movement. At first, there was nothing unusual. Just the usual passing cars, the occasional neighbor walking by. Then I saw it. The same night the video was recorded, at the exact same time. A shadow moved near my bedroom window, just out of the camera's range. I switched angles, hoping for a clearer view, but the person never stepped far enough into the frame. They had known exactly where to stand to avoid being caught. A chill settled in my chest as I realized what that meant. Whoever this was, they had been watching long enough to know my camera angles. They had planned this. I ran through possible explanations, but none of them made me feel any better. This was not a coincidence. Someone wanted me to see this. I copied the video and the security footage onto a separate drive, deciding to take it to the police. But when I arrived at the station, I hesitated. What could they really do with so little information? A person standing outside my window was not exactly a crime. There was no clear threat, nothing to identify them. Still, I went inside and told an officer what had happened. They took down my statement and made a copy of the footage. The officer was polite but not overly concerned. They told me to be cautious and report anything else unusual. That was it. No real answers, no reassurance, just a vague promise to look into it. I left the station feeling more unsettled than before. If the police could not do anything, what was I supposed to do? I considered staying with a friend for a few nights, but I did not want to let fear control me. Instead, I double-checked every lock and kept my phone within reach at all times. Days passed without incident, but the paranoia never faded. Every night I checked the window before going to bed. I watched the security feed constantly, afraid I would see that figure again. The worst part was not knowing if they were still watching, waiting for another chance. Then one evening I heard a noise outside, a faint rustling barely noticeable over the sound of the television. I muted the volume and held my breath, straining to hear. The sound came again, closer this time. I grabbed my phone and moved toward the window, heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, I pulled back the curtain just enough to see outside. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw a shape near the edge of my yard. Someone was there, standing just out of the light. My stomach twisted as I recognized the same stillness from the video. I backed away, trying to stay calm. My hands trembled as I dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was steady, asking for my location and details. I whispered what was happening, afraid to speak too loudly. The figure did not move, did not react, as if they knew I was watching. The minutes stretched on endlessly as I waited for the police to arrive. My pulse pounded in my ears and I fought the urge to run. Then, just as the flashing lights appeared at the end of my street, the figure stepped back into the shadows. By the time the officers got to my door, they were gone. The police searched the area but found nothing. No footprints, no evidence, just empty darkness. They assured me they would patrol the neighborhood for the next few nights, but that did not ease my fear. Whoever this was, they were careful. They knew how to stay hidden. That night, I barely slept, jumping at every creak and whisper of wind, but nothing happened. No more noises, no more shadows outside my window. Days turned into weeks, and the fear gradually faded. The police never found anything, and I never received another USB drive. I did not want to believe it was over, but I had no choice but to move on. I changed my routine, took different routes home, stayed aware of my surroundings. I installed more cameras, better locks, anything to make myself feel safer. It took time, but eventually the nightmares stopped. One evening months later, I was walking home when I caught a glimpse of someone across the street. For a split second, my heart raced, memories of that night flooding back. But when I turned for a better look, there was no one there. Just an empty sidewalk, a quiet street, nothing unusual. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe I had been looking over my shoulder for so long that I started seeing things that were not there. I took a deep breath and kept walking, telling myself that whoever it was, whatever they wanted, they were gone. I had my life back, and I was not going to live in fear anymore. Story 29. I was in the middle of cleaning up after dinner when my phone buzzed on the counter. Wiping my hands on a dish towel, I glanced at the screen. The message was from an unknown number, and it read, "Almost there." I frowned, my mind immediately trying to place who it could be. I had not ordered anything, and I was not expecting any visitors. I tapped on the message, debating whether to respond, but something about it made me hesitate. Setting my phone down, I continued tidying up, assuming it was a wrong number. A few minutes later, another buzz made me check again. The same number had sent another message, but this time it was just a single word: closer. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at the screen. I looked around my house, suddenly feeling uneasy. The windows were locked, and the doors were secure, but the message still unsettled me. I decided to ignore it and went to check on the front door just in case. The porch light was on, casting a glow over the empty steps. The street outside was quiet, only a few houses with their lights still on. I stepped back inside, locking the door again and making sure the deadbolt was in place. My heart was beating a little faster than before, but I tried to brush it off. It had to be a mistake. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated again. "Do you see me?" I nearly dropped the device as I read the message. My breathing became shallow as I turned toward the windows, my fingers gripping the phone tightly. I forced myself to peek through the curtains, scanning the street. There was nothing unusual outside. No strange cars, no people lingering nearby, but the message sent a wave of fear through me. I quickly typed back, "Who is this?" My fingers felt stiff as I sent the message, my heart pounding against my ribs. I watched the screen, waiting for a reply, but none came. My body felt tense as I kept my eyes on the window. There was a deep silence in the house, and I could hear the sound of my own breathing. Minutes passed, and nothing happened. Maybe it was just a prank. I tried to distract myself by turning on the television, but my mind kept drifting back to the messages. I checked the locks again, walking from door to door, making sure everything was secure. When I returned to the living room, my phone lit up once more. "You locked me out." My stomach twisted painfully as I read the words. My hands felt cold as I turned toward the back door. I knew it was locked. I had checked it earlier. Still, the message made me doubt myself. I slowly walked to the back of the house, my footsteps barely making a sound. The door was shut, the lock in place, just as I had left it. I swallowed hard, feeling a lump in my throat. My fingers trembled as I reached for the curtain, carefully pulling it aside to check the yard. There was nothing outside but darkness. The faint glow of the neighbor's porch light barely illuminated the fence. My breath came out in short bursts as I stepped away from the door. I considered calling someone, but I did not even know who to call. The police would probably think I was overreacting. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. Maybe someone was messing with me. I moved to the living room, sitting on the couch with my phone in my hands. Another message came through. "You look scared." My body went rigid as my eyes darted around the room. The curtains were still drawn, the doors were locked, but the message made me feel exposed. I wanted to believe it was just some cruel joke, but something about it felt too direct. I took a deep breath and dialed the number. It rang once before the call ended abruptly. No voicemail. No response. I tried again, but the same thing happened. My pulse was racing as I set the phone down. Whoever it was did not want to talk. They only wanted to watch. I forced myself to stand, my legs feeling weak beneath me. I checked every window and door again, making sure they were locked. My hands were shaking as I moved through the house. The silence felt heavier now, pressing down on me. I turned on more lights, hoping it would make me feel safer. The phone vibrated again. "I can see you." A shiver ran down my spine as I turned toward the window. I could not see anything outside, but I felt watched. My breathing quickened as I stepped away from the window. I did not want to look anymore. I grabbed my phone and typed back, "Leave me alone." My hands felt clammy as I hit send. The reply came almost immediately. "I do not think you want that." My heart pounded so loudly that I could hear it in my ears. I could not stay in the house any longer. Grabbing my keys, I rushed to the front door. I hesitated for a moment, my hand on the knob. If they were outside, opening the door could be a mistake. But staying inside, feeling trapped, was just as terrifying. I took a deep breath and yanked the door open. The night air was cool against my skin as I stepped out onto the porch. The street was still empty. The only sound was the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. I scanned the area, looking for any sign of movement. My phone buzzed again. "You are making this fun." My stomach turned as I gritted my teeth. I refused to play whatever game this was. I hurried to my car, my hands shaking as I unlocked the door and slid inside. I locked the doors and started the engine, my breathing uneven. I did not know where to go, but I could not stay. Just as I was about to pull out of the driveway, another message appeared. "Going somewhere." I felt sick as I looked around, my eyes darting from one shadow to another. I floored the gas pedal, driving away from the house without looking back. I kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. I needed to go somewhere safe. I finally pulled into a well-lit parking lot near a convenience store. I sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath. My phone was still in my lap, the screen glowing faintly. There was another message waiting for me. "Not far now." Oh. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes as I stared at the words. My entire body was tense, my nerves on edge. I could not take it anymore. I was going to call the police. My fingers fumbled as I dialed, my hands shaking too much to press the buttons properly. Before I could finish, another message popped up. "Look up." My breath caught in my throat as I slowly lifted my head. My reflection stared back at me in the rearview mirror. There was nothing there. The parking lot was empty. I exhaled shakily, gripping the phone tighter. Then, just as I started to relax, a figure stepped out from behind a nearby car. My stomach dropped. I did not hesitate. I slammed the car into reverse, my tires screeching against the pavement as I sped out of the lot. My heart pounded wildly as I drove toward the nearest police station. I did not care if they thought I was imagining things. I needed help. I needed to be somewhere safe. The messages had stopped, but I knew that person was real. When I finally reached the station, I parked haphazardly and ran inside. My words tumbled out in a frantic rush as I explained everything to the officer at the desk. He listened patiently, then took my phone to examine the messages. After a few moments, he handed it back to me, his expression unreadable. "The number that sent those messages," he said carefully, "has been disconnected for years." My blood ran cold at his words. That was not possible. I had just received them. The officer assured me they would check the area around my house and keep watch. I nodded numbly, my mind struggling to process everything. As I sat there, waiting for them to finish, I glanced at my phone one last time. The messages were gone. Every single one of them. Story 30. I woke up feeling colder than usual, even though my blanket was wrapped tightly around me. The air in the room felt heavier, like the kind of chill that lingers when a door has been left open for too long. My body felt sluggish as I sat up, rubbing my eyes before glancing toward the bedroom door. Everything looked normal, but something in the air felt off. I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. As I stepped out of bed and walked toward the kitchen, I immediately noticed the open fridge door. The dim glow of the refrigerator light cast eerie shadows across the floor, and the cold air seeped out, making the whole space feel unnatural. My heart pounded as I took another step forward, my eyes landing on the neatly stacked food on the counter. Every item from the fridge was arranged in perfect rows, as if someone had carefully placed them there with a purpose. I stood frozen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I walked closer, my breath coming out in slow, controlled exhales as I examined the items. The milk carton sat perfectly beside the juice, with all the vegetables aligned by size. Even the eggs were removed from the carton and placed in a straight row, unbroken. My hands felt clammy as I reached for the fridge door, feeling the cold handle against my skin. The only explanation that made sense was that I had done this in my sleep, but I had never experienced anything like that before. I checked my phone to see if I had any notifications or missed calls, but there was nothing unusual. The time on the screen showed it was barely past 3 in the morning. The silence of the house pressed against my ears, making every sound seem louder than it should be. I took a deep breath and tried to think logically, but no matter how I looked at it, I could not explain why or how this had happened. I hesitated before reaching out to touch one of the neatly placed items on the counter. My fingers brushed against the smooth surface of a container, and I felt a strange sense of unease. It was as if something was urging me not to disturb the arrangement. Ignoring the feeling, I picked up the milk and placed it back in the fridge. The moment I moved it, I felt a shift in the atmosphere, like the air around me had thickened. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I quickly grabbed the rest of the food, shoving everything back into the fridge without bothering to keep it organized. My hands shook as I closed the fridge door, taking a step back and staring at it. I knew I had locked the front door before going to bed. There were no signs of a break-in, no missing items, nothing to suggest that someone else had been inside. Yet I could not shake the overwhelming sense that I was not alone. I turned around slowly, scanning the room with careful eyes. The chairs were exactly where I had left them, the curtains still drawn shut. I reached for the light switch and flipped it on, bathing the kitchen in artificial brightness. The room looked normal, but I no longer trusted my own surroundings. My mind kept circling back to the thought that something had changed. I decided to check the rest of the house, moving cautiously from room to room. Everything was in its usual place, with no signs of disturbance. I even checked the locks again, finding them secured just as I had left them. Still, the feeling of unease lingered, making it impossible to convince myself that everything was fine. I returned to the kitchen, standing in front of the fridge once more. The door was still shut, the food back inside where it belonged. It should have made me feel better, but it did not. Something had happened, something I could not explain. I tried to recall every detail from the night before, wondering if I had sleepwalked without realizing it. No matter how much I thought about it, I could not find a reasonable answer. The exhaustion weighed down on me, but I knew I would not be able to sleep. I made myself a cup of tea, hoping the warmth would settle my nerves. As I sipped it slowly, I kept glancing at the fridge, half expecting the door to swing open again on its own. The minutes dragged on, and the feeling of being watched refused to fade. I turned on the television for some background noise, trying to drown out the silence that made my thoughts race even more. The sound of late-night commercials filled the space, but it did not bring me any comfort. I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders and sat on the couch, keeping my eyes on the kitchen. I wanted to believe that it was nothing, that I had simply done it myself without remembering. The hours passed, and eventually the exhaustion caught up with me. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the soft light of early morning filtering through the curtains. The television was still on, playing some morning talk show I did not recognize. I sat up slowly, rubbing my temples as I tried to shake off the grogginess. The first thing I did was check the kitchen. The fridge door was still closed, the food still inside where I had placed it. In the daylight, everything seemed normal again, as if the events of the night before had only been a strange dream. But deep down, I knew it had been real. I could not explain it, but I knew something had happened. I decided to go about my morning as usual, making breakfast and trying to push away the lingering unease. The routine helped, giving me something to focus on instead of my thoughts. By the time I finished eating, I almost convinced myself that it was just a one-time occurrence. I told myself that if it happened again, I would set up a camera to see what was really going on. As the day went on, the unsettling feeling faded little by little. The logical part of my mind kept reminding me that there had to be an explanation, even if I did not know what it was yet. I chose to move forward, refusing to let fear take over. If something else happened, I would be ready for it. Until then, I would not let it control me. Story 31. The disposable camera sat on my doorstep as if someone had carefully placed it there, waiting for me to find it. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands, feeling the rough plastic edges. There was no note, no markings, nothing to indicate who had left it. My first thought was that it had been dropped by a passerby, but as I examined it closer, I noticed something unsettling. The film had already been used up. Every picture had been taken. A knot formed in my stomach as I stepped inside, locking the door behind me. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the camera, debating whether I should get the film developed. Part of me did not want to know what was on it, but the other part knew I would not be able to ignore it. My curiosity won. The next morning I took it to a photo lab, trying to act casual as I handed it over. The clerk told me it would be ready by the afternoon, so I spent the next few hours in a haze of anxiety. When I returned, the photos were in a plain envelope. My hands felt unsteady as I took it, nodding at the clerk before walking out. I waited until I was home before opening it, as if I needed the safety of my walls to face whatever was inside. The first few pictures seemed ordinary, but my breath caught in my throat as I flipped through them. Every single one was of my apartment. There were shots of my living room, my kitchen, and my bedroom, all taken from slightly different angles. Some were grainy, others clearer, as if taken at different times of the day. I could see my furniture, my belongings, everything just as I had left it. Then the photos became more specific. There were close-ups of my front door, my windows, even the lock on my back entrance. My skin prickled as I realized whoever had taken these had studied every detail. As I reached the last few photos, my heart pounded. These were not just pictures of my apartment. They were pictures of me. There was one of me sitting on the couch, looking at my phone, completely unaware. Another of me asleep in bed, my face partially obscured by my pillow. The final image was the worst. It was taken from outside, capturing me through my bedroom window, my eyes half open as if I had been stirring from sleep. I dropped the stack of photos onto the table, my breath shallow. Someone had been watching me, standing close enough to take these without me ever noticing. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone, but I hesitated. What would I even say? That I had found a camera full of pictures of my own home. That I had no idea who took them or why. The police might ask if I had any enemies or if I had noticed anything strange, but I had no answers to give. I forced myself to go through the photos again, searching for any clues. There were no reflections, no glimpses of the person behind the camera. The angles were careful, deliberate. Whoever had done this knew how to avoid being seen. I checked my locks again, making sure they were secure, though it did nothing to calm me. I pulled the curtains tight, but the knowledge that they had already seen inside made it feel useless. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak, every rustle of the wind outside made my heart race. I kept expecting to hear footsteps, to see a shadow move outside my window. I left my lights on as if the brightness could push back the fear settling deep in my chest. My mind kept replaying the final photo, the one of me stirring in bed. Had I been waking up because I sensed someone was there? Was I truly alone now? The next morning I could not stay in my apartment. I packed a bag and left, heading to a hotel without telling anyone. I needed time to think, to figure out what to do next. As I sat on the hotel bed, my phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. It was a single image. My heart dropped. It was a photo of me leaving my apartment that morning, my bag slung over my shoulder. I was not alone. Someone was still watching. Story 32. I stared at the package sitting on my kitchen table, my hands resting at my sides. It was a small, plain box, the kind you might receive when ordering something insignificant. There was no return address, no sender information, nothing to indicate where it had come from. The only thing on it was my name, written in neat, precise letters. My stomach twisted as I reached for it, my fingers hesitating just above the surface. I had not ordered anything recently, and there was no reason anyone should be sending me something. I picked it up carefully, turning it over in my hands. It was light, barely weighing anything at all. My pulse quickened as I peeled away the tape, the cardboard folding open with ease. Inside was another box, even smaller. My chest tightened as I lifted it out, setting the larger box aside. The smaller box was plain, unmarked, just like the first. I swallowed hard before opening it, my fingers slightly trembling. The moment I saw what was inside, my breath caught in my throat. Lying at the bottom was a single key. My key. The one I had lost nearly 2 months ago. The one I had searched for relentlessly, turning my apartment upside down trying to find. The one I had finally given up on and replaced. I reached in and picked it up, my fingers curling around the cool metal. There was no mistaking it. The shape, the slight bend near the tip, the worn edges from years of use. It was mine. My skin prickled as I turned it over in my palm, my mind racing. I had lost it outside, near my apartment complex. I had assumed it had fallen into a storm drain or been picked up by someone who had no way of knowing who it belonged to. But now here it was, carefully packaged and sent directly to me. A sick feeling settled in my stomach as I glanced around my apartment. The front door was locked, the windows shut. Everything was as it should be. But someone had found my key. Someone had held on to it long enough to send it back to me in a box with no explanation. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I set the key down on the table, taking a step back. I grabbed my phone, my hands clammy as I scrolled through my contacts. Who would have done this? A friend? A neighbor? Someone playing a weird joke? I tapped out a quick message to a few people, asking if they had found my key and sent it back to me. One by one, the responses came in. No, no, no. Each one only made the unease in my chest grow stronger. I walked to my front door, double-checking the lock. It was secure, just as I had left it. I turned, scanning the room again. Everything seemed normal, but I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. I had lost that key outside. That meant someone had not only picked it up, but had known exactly where I lived. I picked up the small box again, searching for any clues. The handwriting on the label was unfamiliar. The postmark was from my own city, but there was nothing else. No note, no message, just my key, returned to me in complete silence. My fingers tightened around the edge of the box as I tried to think. If someone had meant well, why not tell me? Why not just drop it off at my building's office or leave it in my mailbox? The worst possibility crept into my mind, sending a cold chill through my spine. What if whoever sent it had not returned it to be helpful? What if they had kept it all this time, only to send it back when they no longer needed it? The thought made my stomach turn. I checked the front door again, my paranoia growing with each passing second. I needed to do something. I grabbed my spare key from the counter and left the apartment, locking the door behind me. My footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as I hurried downstairs to the building's front entrance. The security guard was sitting at the desk, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I approached, giving me a nod. I hesitated before speaking, unsure how to even explain what had happened. I pulled the key from my pocket, holding it up. "Have you seen anyone hanging around my apartment? I lost this key a while ago, and someone just mailed it back to me with no note." The guard frowned, leaning forward to get a closer look. He shook his head, saying he had not noticed anything strange. I pressed further, asking if he could check the security cameras. He sighed but agreed, pulling up the footage from the past few days. I leaned over the desk, watching as he fast-forwarded through the recordings. Hours passed in seconds, people coming and going, nothing unusual. Then, something made him stop. The screen showed a delivery person walking into the building, a small package in hand. They wore a cap pulled low over their face, making it impossible to see them clearly. They approached the mailroom, set the package down, and left just as quickly as they had come. The footage was grainy, the details unclear, but one thing stood out. They never scanned a package label. The guard rewound the footage, slowing it down. Most delivery services had to scan packages when dropping them off, especially in secured buildings. But this person had not. They had simply walked in, placed the box down, and left. My skin crawled as I realized what that meant. This was not a normal delivery. Whoever had sent me the key had done it personally. The guard turned to me, his face serious. "If you are worried, you should file a report." I nodded, my throat dry. I thanked him and left, my mind racing as I made my way back upstairs. My apartment felt different now. No longer safe, no longer mine. I locked the door behind me, securing the deadbolt, my fingers lingering on the metal. I did not sleep that night. I lay awake, listening to every sound, every creak of the building settling. My mind kept going back to the key, to the package, to the unknown person who had held on to it all this time. What had they been doing with it? Why return it now? The next morning I changed the locks. I watched as the locksmith removed the old one, replacing it with a brand new set of keys. I held the new key tightly in my palm, the weight of it strangely comforting. I knew it was not a perfect solution, but it was something. Days passed, then weeks, and nothing else happened. No more strange packages, no signs of anyone lurking around my apartment. Slowly, I allowed myself to relax. The fear faded into the background, becoming just another strange memory. One evening, as I was sorting through my mail, I saw another small box sitting on the table near the front desk. My breath hitched as I stared at it, my fingers going cold. It was the same size, the same plain design, but this time it was not addressed to me. It was addressed to my neighbor. Story 33. I was alone in my apartment when I heard it. A whisper, faint but unmistakable, drifting from the air vent near the ceiling. My name. I froze where I stood, my hands tightening around the cup of coffee I had just made. The room was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I glanced at the vent. half expecting to see something staring back at me, but there was nothing. My mind immediately searched for a logical explanation. Maybe it was a trick of the air moving through the ducts, or maybe a neighbor's voice had somehow traveled through the vents. But I knew my neighbors and none of them had ever called my name. I set my coffee down, my pulse quickening as I took a slow step forward. The whisper had been so soft, almost like a breath, but I had not imagined it. I stood beneath the vent, tilting my head up. The slats were covered in dust, the metal edges slightly bent in places. I listened, holding my breath, waiting for another sound, but there was nothing. Just silence stretching out, pressing down on me like a weight. I exhaled sharply, telling myself I was being paranoid. Still, the unease did not fade. I grabbed a chair from the dining table and dragged it beneath the vent. Climbing up, I reached for the slats, running my fingers along the edges. They were cold to the touch, rough with built-up grime. I peered inside, but the darkness swallowed everything beyond the first few inches. I swallowed hard, feeling a chill run down my spine. There was no reason for anyone to be in the air ducts. But then why had I heard my name? I stepped down, pushing the chair back into place, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. I reminded myself that sound traveled strangely in old buildings. It could have been anything. I sat on the couch, turning on the television for background noise, but my attention kept drifting back to the vent. My name had not been spoken in a way that sounded accidental. It had been deliberate. Hours passed, and I forced myself to go about my night as usual. I cooked dinner, cleaned up, and tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. As I was getting ready for bed, I hesitated before turning off the lights. My eyes drifted once more to the vent, my skin prickling with the memory of that whisper. I shook my head and got into bed, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. The room was dark, the silence almost too thick. I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes when I heard it again. The whisper, my name. Soft, slow, like someone was right above me, speaking through the vent. My chest tightened, my breath caught in my throat. I turned my head slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. The vent was right above my bed, and this time I knew I was not imagining it. I wanted to tell myself it was just the wind, just the pipes shifting, just something logical. But deep down, I knew the truth. Someone had whispered my name, and I had no idea who or what was listening from the other side. Story 34. I was lying on my couch, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, when the message came in. The screen lit up with a number I did not recognize, followed by a short, unsettling text. I will see you tonight. Below it, my exact address was typed out down to the apartment number. My stomach clenched as I reread it, my fingers tightening around my phone. At first, I thought it was a mistake. A wrong number. Someone must have typed it out thinking they were messaging a friend. But my address being included made that excuse feel weak. If it had been just the message, I could have ignored it, but the fact that they knew where I lived changed everything. I sat up, my pulse picking up as I glanced around my apartment. Nothing seemed out of place. The doors were locked. The windows were shut. I checked them again just to be sure, pressing my hand against the latches to confirm they were secure. The unease settled deeper in my chest as I looked back at my phone. I could ignore it, block the number, pretend it had never happened, but something about it gnawed at me. I typed out a response, hesitating for a moment before hitting send. Who is this? I watched the screen, waiting. The message delivered, but no response came. The longer I stared at it, the more uncomfortable I became. If it was a mistake, they would have replied by now, apologizing for sending it to the wrong number. But the silence stretched on, thick and unsettling. I tried to push it from my mind, convincing myself it was nothing. But as the evening dragged on, the anxiety only grew. I double-checked my locks again, then pulled the blinds shut, making sure no one could see inside. My heart pounded as I paced the apartment, glancing at my phone every few minutes, waiting for another message that never came. By the time night fell, I was exhausted from worrying, but I knew I would not be able to sleep. Every little sound made me jump. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the building settling, even the wind against the windows sent a jolt of unease through me. I kept my phone in my hand, checking it obsessively, hoping for some kind of explanation. A part of me wanted to call someone, but I did not even know what I would say. It was just a text. Nothing had happened. Maybe it really was a wrong number, but that did not explain why they had my address. I decided to stay awake, at least for a few more hours. I turned on the television, hoping the background noise would make me feel less alone. The glow of the screen cast long shadows across the walls, making every dark corner feel ominous. I sat on the couch, my body tense, my ears straining for any unusual sound. Then, sometime after midnight, my phone vibrated again. I nearly dropped it as I scrambled to check the screen. It was the same number. No words this time, just a single image. A dark, grainy photo of my apartment building, taken from outside. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it, my hands going cold. The angle was low, as if someone had been standing near the sidewalk, looking up at my window. I felt my stomach twist, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. This was not a mistake. This was deliberate. Someone was outside watching. I jumped to my feet, rushing to turn off the lights. My hands trembled as I peeked through the blinds, my breath shallow. The street below was empty. No movement, no sign of anyone standing there. But I knew they had been. They had taken that picture. They had sent it to me. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. I needed to call someone. The police. But what would I even tell them? That someone had sent me a message with my address. That they had taken a picture of my building. Would they even take it seriously? My phone vibrated again. My fingers fumbled as I unlocked the screen. Another image. This time it was the front door of my apartment complex. Closer. My pulse pounded in my ears as I realized whoever it was, they were getting nearer. I grabbed my keys and phone, my body moving before I could think. I was not staying here. I did not care if it was paranoia. I needed to get out. I slipped on my shoes, heart racing, every second stretching unbearably. Then, just as I reached for the doorknob, another vibration. I forced myself to look. One last message. I am here. A heavy knock sounded at my door. My entire body went rigid. I stared at the door, unable to breathe. The knock came again. Slow, deliberate. My hand hovered over the doorknob, but I did not dare touch it. I stepped back, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. Another knock, then silence. Minutes passed. I did not move. I barely breathed. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might give me away. I stared at the door, waiting, listening. But there was nothing. After what felt like an eternity, I worked up the courage to check through the peephole. My stomach twisted at the sight of the empty hallway. No one was there. The building was quiet. It was as if nothing had happened. I did not sleep that night. I stayed locked in my apartment until the sun came up, my body rigid with fear. The messages stopped. The knocking did not return. but I knew someone had been there. Someone had watched, had waited, had wanted me to know they were close. The next day I packed my things and left. I did not tell anyone why. I did not look back. I just knew I could not stay in that apartment any longer. Even now I do not know who sent the message or why, but I know one thing for certain. They had not texted the wrong number. Story 35. I noticed them late at night, just before going to bed. At first they looked like shadows in the dim light, faint marks running down the surface of my bedroom door. I stepped closer, reaching out to run my fingers over them. The grooves were deep, uneven, as if something with sharp edges had dragged across the wood. A chill ran through me as I stared at them, trying to make sense of how they had gotten there. I lived alone, no pets, no visitors, just me. I turned on the brighter overhead light, hoping I had imagined it, but the scratches were real. Some were thin, like they had been made with a nail, while others were wider, rougher. My heartbeat quickened as I traced them with my fingertips. I had not heard anything strange. No noises, no signs of forced entry. The door had been fine yesterday, I was sure of it. I glanced around my room, scanning for anything out of place. The window was shut, locked like always. My closet door stood slightly open, but that was normal. Everything else looked the same. I took a deep breath, telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe I had scratched it myself without realizing. Maybe the marks had always been there, and I was just noticing them now. But deep down, I knew that was not true. I would have seen them before. I would have remembered. The scratches looked fresh, but wood slightly splintered in some places. I checked the floor near the door, searching for anything unusual. Nothing. No debris, no footprints, no signs of movement. Just silence. I grabbed my phone, debating whether I should take a picture. But what would that do? Who would I even show it to? I had no one else living here, no one to ask if they had seen or heard anything. The thought made my stomach tighten. I was completely alone. I forced myself to turn away, trying to shake the unease creeping up my spine. I told myself I would deal with it in the morning. Maybe I would repaint the door, cover the scratches so I would not have to think about them. But when I turned off the light and lay in bed, the feeling of being watched settled in. Sleep did not come easily. Every small sound made me tense. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting to see it move. Nothing happened, but the unease never left. Hours passed before I finally drifted off, my body exhausted from overthinking. The next morning, I got up with the memory of the scratches still fresh in my mind. I hesitated before looking at the door, almost afraid of what I would see. The marks were still there, just as deep as before, but now there were more. New ones, running lower down near the bottom, as if something had returned during the night. Story 36. I had left work later than usual that evening. The streets were quieter than normal, with only the occasional car passing by. The air was cool, and the distant hum of city life filled the silence. As I walked, I could not shake the feeling that something was off. It was subtle at first, just an uneasy sensation in the back of my mind. But as I continued, the feeling grew stronger. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see someone behind me, but the sidewalk was empty. The only movement came from the flickering streetlights and rustling trees. I shook my head, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. Maybe I was just tired. I adjusted my bag and quickened my pace, eager to get home. But the moment I did, the feeling returned. It was as if someone was matching my steps, always staying just out of sight. I turned around again, this time more abruptly, hoping to catch whoever it was off guard. Still nothing. The street remained empty just as before. I let out a breath, trying to steady my nerves. Maybe it was just paranoia. Maybe the stress from the day was getting to me. But deep down, I knew that was not true. Something was wrong. I could feel it. I kept walking, my body tense with every step. The streetlights above cast long shadows, stretching across the pavement like twisted figures. My apartment was still a few blocks away, but suddenly the distance felt much longer. The road was silent, too silent. I tried to focus on my footsteps, but I could hear something else. A faint, almost imperceptible sound. It was not loud, just a soft shuffle, barely noticeable. But it was there. I spun around once more, my heart pounding. Again, nothing. My eyes darted to the alleyways, the parked cars, the darkened doorways of closed shops. If someone was there, they were doing a good job of staying hidden. I swallowed hard and forced myself to keep moving. My fingers tightened around my phone inside my pocket. I considered calling someone, but what would I even say? That I had a bad feeling. That I thought someone was following me but could not prove it. It sounded ridiculous. I decided to just get home as quickly as possible. The sooner I was inside, the better. As I turned onto another street, my stomach tightened. There was a small convenience store on the corner, its bright lights spilling onto the pavement. Without hesitation, I stepped inside. The sudden shift from the quiet street to the buzzing store felt jarring. I pretended to browse the shelves, using the reflection in the glass refrigerator doors to check behind me. I saw nothing unusual, just the store clerk scrolling through his phone. After a few moments, I made my way to the counter and bought a bottle of water. It was just an excuse to stay inside for a little longer. As I paid, I casually asked the clerk if he had seen anyone hanging around outside. He barely looked up before shaking his head. To him, it was just another ordinary night. But to me, something still felt wrong. I lingered near the entrance, pretending to check my phone. My apartment was only a short walk away now, but the thought of stepping back outside made my skin crawl. Taking a deep breath, I finally pushed the door open and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The night air felt heavier than before. I forced myself to walk at a normal pace, though every instinct screamed at me to run. My mind kept racing with possibilities. Maybe someone had been following me and had given up when I went inside the store. Or maybe they were still out there, waiting for me to lower my guard. I reached my building and hurried up the steps. As I fumbled with my keys, I could not help but glance over my shoulder one last time. The street was empty, just as it had been before, but that feeling had not gone away. I stepped inside quickly, locking the door behind me. Inside, I took a deep breath and leaned against the door. The silence of my apartment was almost comforting. I shook my head, feeling ridiculous. Maybe it really had been my imagination after all. But then, as I set my bag down, something outside caught my eye. Through the small gap between the curtains, I saw movement. My stomach dropped as I stepped closer to the window. Across the street, standing just at the edge of the shadows, was a figure. They were too far away for me to make out any details, but I could tell they were facing my building. A cold chill ran down my spine. They were standing still, just watching. My hands clenched at my sides as I fought the urge to move the curtain further. I did not want them to know I had seen them. My pulse pounded in my ears as I slowly stepped back from the window. I checked the locks on my door and grabbed my phone. My fingers hovered over the keypad, debating whether to call someone. But just as I was about to, I glanced out the window again. The figure was gone. My breath caught in my throat. I stayed awake for hours, my mind racing with questions I could not answer. Who had been following me? Had they been watching me for longer than I realized? And most importantly, would they come back? The next morning, I was still on edge as I left for work. The street was bright with daylight, but I could not shake the unease from the night before. I told myself it was over, that whoever it was had moved on. Days passed, and nothing else happened. The feeling of being watched slowly faded. I convinced myself that maybe it had just been a trick of my mind. But even now, every time I walk home alone, I still find myself looking over my shoulder, just in case. Story 37. I had never paid much attention to my laptop camera before. It was just there, something I rarely used. But one evening, while going through some settings, I noticed something strange. The camera history showed it had been activated multiple times during the night. At first, I thought it was a mistake or some kind of glitch. But the more I looked, the more uneasy I became. Each activation happened while I was asleep, at different times throughout the night. I tried to remember if I had left any programs open that might have triggered it, but I knew I had not. I barely used the camera at all. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. I tried to stay calm, telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. That night, I placed a piece of tape over the camera before going to bed. It was a simple step, but it made me feel a little safer. The next morning, I checked the camera history again. My stomach tightened when I saw that it had still been activated, even with the tape covering it. That meant something or someone was trying to use it. I quickly went through my laptop, checking for any unfamiliar programs or strange files. I searched for anything that might explain what was happening. I found nothing unusual, but that only made things worse. If there was nothing on my laptop causing this, then what else could it be? I felt exposed, like I was being watched without knowing by who or why. I decided to reset my laptop, wiping everything clean. It took time, but I wanted to be sure that nothing suspicious remained. I changed all my passwords, installed extra security software, and turned off my camera permissions. That night, I felt a little better knowing I had taken steps to protect myself, but the fear still lingered. The next morning, I hesitated before checking the camera history again. My heart pounded as I opened the settings. This time, there were no new activations. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, thinking that maybe I had fixed the problem. But just as I started to relax, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There was a single video file saved in my laptop's temporary folder. My hand shook as I clicked on it. The screen showed my dark room, lit only by the faint glow of my laptop. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then, I saw movement. The blankets on my bed shifted slightly, as if someone had touched them. But I had been asleep the whole time. I slammed the laptop shut, my breathing uneven. My mind struggled to make sense of what I had just seen. I knew I had been alone in my room. There was no one else in my house. But the video showed something different. I replayed it, trying to look for any explanation. I could not see anyone in the footage, but the movement was clear. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. I kept my laptop closed, afraid to open it again. I considered getting rid of it altogether, but I needed to understand what was happening. The next day, I took it to a professional, hoping they could find out if my laptop had been hacked. They ran a deep scan but found nothing unusual. No remote access, no viruses, nothing. I asked if there was any way to explain the camera turning on by itself. They told me it was rare but possible due to a hardware issue. But that did not explain the video. That did not explain the movement in my bed. I left feeling more unsettled than before. If no one had hacked my laptop, then what had caused it? That night, I set up my phone to record while I slept. I placed it in a corner of my room, facing my bed. I needed to see if anything happened again. The next morning, I checked the footage, dreading what I might find. At first, everything seemed normal. Then, just past 3 in the morning, I saw it. The laptop screen lit up on its own. The camera turned on, the small light glowing in the dark. I could see myself sleeping, completely unaware. Then, for a brief second, I saw something else. A shadow moved across the screen, blocking part of the camera view. It was gone in an instant, but I had seen it. I shut off the video, my hands trembling. I checked my room, looking for any signs that someone had been inside. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The doors were locked, the windows secured. There was no explanation for what I had seen. I packed up my laptop and took it out of my room. I could not stand having it near me anymore. I replaced it with a new one, making sure to cover the camera at all times. Days passed, and I kept checking for any signs of strange activity. Nothing happened. Even though things seemed normal again, I still felt uneasy. I could not explain what had happened, and that was the worst part. I wanted to believe it was just a glitch, a coincidence, anything other than what my mind was telling me. But deep down, I knew something had been watching me, and I would never know who or why. Story 38. The notebook was wedged deep under the couch, covered in dust. At first, I thought it was something I had misplaced, but the moment I picked it up, I knew it was not mine. The cover was plain, unmarked, with no sign of who it belonged to. My hands felt cold as I flipped it open, my eyes scanning the first page. The handwriting was small and neat, each entry dated, each note precise. I read the first few lines, my pulse quickening with every word. The notes described everything I had done that day, down to the smallest detail. What time I woke up, what I ate, where I went, even what I wore. My stomach tightened as I turned the page, finding the same level of detail recorded for the next day. Every entry followed the same pattern, carefully tracking my movements. I skimmed ahead, flipping through the pages in disbelief. The notes covered an entire month, recording my life with unsettling accuracy. Whoever wrote this knew my schedule, my habits, my routines. They knew when I left the house, when I came back, what time I turned off my lights at night. My breath came faster as I realized what that meant. Someone had been watching me. I slammed the notebook shut and stood up, suddenly feeling exposed. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything out of place. The windows were closed, the doors locked, but it did not matter. Whoever wrote this had been close enough to see everything. I gripped the notebook tightly, my mind racing with questions. How long had this been happening? How had they gotten inside? A chill crawled up my spine as a new thought formed. If they had been inside before, what if they were still here? I turned toward the hallway, my body tense, listening for any sound. The house was silent, but it no longer felt safe. Every shadow seemed deeper, every corner hiding something unseen. I checked the locks, double-checking the windows, making sure nothing was open. Sitting back down, I forced myself to go through the notebook again, looking for anything that might tell me who had written it. The handwriting never changed, steady and deliberate. The ink was black, and the paper felt new, as if it had only been written recently. Then, near the end, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The last entry was dated yesterday. That meant whoever had been keeping track of me had still been watching, even now. My hands shook as I read the final lines. It described what time I had dinner, what show I had watched, and when I had fallen asleep. But the last sentence was different from the others. It was not a record of my actions. It was a message. I know you found this." I dropped the notebook, my heart pounding in my chest. My breath came in quick gasps as I stood up, backing away from the couch. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out of the house, to call someone, but my body felt frozen. I forced myself to move, grabbing my phone with shaking hands. I dialed 911, struggling to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. The dispatcher listened, asking me questions I could barely process. They told me to stay on the line and wait for officers to arrive. I clutched the phone tightly, my eyes darting around the room, afraid that at any moment I would see someone step out of the shadows. Minutes felt like hours as I waited. I kept glancing at the notebook on the floor, as if it might change, as if more words would suddenly appear. Then, finally, flashing lights appeared outside, and the sound of footsteps approached my door. I rushed to let the officers in, barely able to find my voice as I explained everything. They took the notebook, flipping through the pages with serious expressions. One of them asked if I had noticed anything strange lately, anyone following me, anything missing. I shook my head, feeling helpless. I had not noticed anything. Not until now. They searched the house, checking every room, every possible hiding place, but they found nothing. One officer stayed with me while the others searched the outside of the house. I could hear them talking on their radios, but their words blurred together. My mind was stuck on the fact that someone had been close enough to document my life without me noticing. How many times had they stood outside my window? How many times had they been in my home? The officers found no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing to explain how the notebook had ended up under my couch. They told me to be cautious, to let them know if anything else happened. One of them suggested I stay somewhere else for a while. The idea of leaving felt safer than staying, so I packed a bag and went to a friend's house for the night. Sleep did not come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone standing in the darkness, writing down every move I made. I kept thinking about the last entry, the way it ended with that single, chilling sentence. Had they known I would find the notebook that day? Had they placed it there for me to see? The next morning I checked the security cameras outside my house, hoping for answers. The footage from the past few nights showed nothing unusual. No one approaching the house, no movement near the windows. It made no sense. Someone had been inside, had watched me, had written everything down. But they had left no trace. Days passed without incident, but I could not shake the feeling of being watched. I changed my routine, took different routes home, avoided being alone whenever possible. The police followed up, but without any leads, there was little they could do. I installed new locks, added more cameras, did everything I could to make my house feel secure. Weeks later, I found myself staring at the couch again, unable to forget the way I had discovered the notebook. I had searched every inch of my home since then, looking for any sign that someone had been there again. But there was nothing. No new notes, no signs of intrusion. Maybe they were gone. Maybe they had seen my reaction and decided to stop. I wanted to believe that, but deep down, I knew the truth. Whoever it was, they were still out there, and they'd been close enough to know everything about me. Story 39. I rubbed my eyes, still groggy from sleep, as the doorbell rang again. My heart pounded slightly as I sat up, glancing at the clock on my nightstand. It was just past 3 in the morning. A deep unease settled in my chest as I pulled the blanket off and made my way toward the window. The street was quiet, dimly lit by the flickering street lamp on the corner. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There was no one there. No car parked outside. No shadowy figure standing by the door. Just a single chair sitting on my porch, positioned directly in front of the door. I felt a strange chill creep over my skin. The chair had not been there the night before. I knew that for certain. I had locked the door, checked the porch, and turned off the lights before heading to bed. Someone had placed it there while I was sleeping.